The betrayal calculus. Someone close to you does something small, cancels plans last minute, doesn't remember something you told them, laughs at the wrong moment. In that instant, your brain isn't just noting the action, it's running a calculation in the background, one that started the moment you met. It's tallying how much you've invested in this person, how much they've invested in you, and whether the balance holds. Betrayal isn't a sudden rupture, it's the slow recognition that the equation no longer works. Your friend borrowed money but keeps forgetting to pay you back. Your partner says they want honesty, then gets defensive when you're honest. Your colleague takes credit for your work but expects you to cover for theirs. Each time, you're not just angry at the action. You're angry because the invisible ledger shifted. The investment you made is now a loss. What makes this brutal is that the other person often isn't running the same calculation at all. They might genuinely think you're fine, might not even remember the promise they broke because it wasn't weighted the same way in their mind, but your brain keeps score. It keeps receipts. Around the third or fourth broken pattern, the ledger flips from credit to debt, and suddenly that person feels less like someone you chose and more like someone who's taking from you. This is the calculus most people never name, but everyone runs. It explains why you can stay angry at someone for years, why small betrayals feel enormous, why you might eventually do the thing that shocks them, pull away, stop trying, go cold, without ever having a conversation about it. The betrayal didn't start with that last act. It started the moment the math stopped adding up. Envy disguised as concern. You get a promotion. Within hours, your oldest friend texts, "That's amazing, but are you sure you're ready? I just worry you'll burn out." Those roles can be so toxic. The words sound like love. They feel like criticism. And here's what makes it poisonous. You can't quite prove they're wrong. They've wrapped their envy so tight in doubt and care that it looks like protection. This is one of the deepest human moves, the ability to demolish someone's joy while maintaining plausible deniability. Your brain registers the threat even if your conscious mind can't name it, which is why it lands harder than a direct attack would. If someone just said, "I'm jealous," you'd know what you're dealing with. But concern sneaks past your defenses because concern is supposed to mean they love you. Concern is supposed to mean safety. So when envy wears concern's mask, it poisons both the relationship and your own confidence at the moment you should be building it strongest. The person delivering it might not even know they're doing it. The jealousy runs deep enough that they've genuinely convinced themselves they're being protective, almost noble. But watch the pattern if you're paying attention. The questions only come when you win. The worry evaporates when you fail. The care is conditional on your staying small enough that they don't have to feel the gap widening. Notice this in yourself too, especially when someone else's good news arrives. That small sting before the congratulations, that's envy trying to speak through your mouth. The real skill is catching it before it leaves your lips. The move is to name it quietly to yourself first, then choose differently. Let their joy land clean without your doubt attached to it, and guard your own wins the same way you'd guard someone you love. Kindness read as weakness. You bend to help someone move their boxes on a Saturday. Months later, they're making small decisions that affect you without asking. You mention it gently. They bristle, act confused, then quietly pull away. The relationship feels different now, colder, harder to predict. What happened? Your kindness got filed under available instead of valuable, and that's when the trap closes. Here's the part nobody says out loud. People trust generosity far less than they trust boundaries. When you show up with no strings attached, some part of their brain doesn't know what to do with it. Kindness without visible cost looks like infinite supply, like permission, like a crack they can lean into without consequence. It doesn't build respect. It builds an expectation that you'll always be the person who absorbs the inconvenience. The real poison is that this isn't about them being bad people. It's about human wiring. We respect what costs us. A friend who says no to us makes us sit up straighter. A friend who says yes to everything becomes ambient. You fade from person to utility, and the moment someone senses they've got you on speed dial, a subtle shift happens. They start testing the boundaries you never drew. They ask for more. They demand with the tone of someone settling a debt rather than asking a favor. The escape route isn't to become cold. It's to let your kindness have a shape. Let it have limits. Say yes to some things and no to others, not out of spite, but out of respect for your own time. People who matter will notice the difference instantly. They'll treat you differently because you've finally shown them that your presence isn't infinite. That's when the real relationship starts. Status threat detection. Your brain has a smoke detector for status loss, and it's absurdly sensitive, firing off alarms at whispers when most people would need a fire. Someone gets promoted ahead of you. A friend mentions their vacation casually. A colleague laughs harder at someone else's joke. Each one trips the wire. Not because you consciously care about rank, it's deeper than that. Your nervous system is reading the room for signs that you are slipping, that your place in the group is shrinking, that you might soon be pushed toward the edges where predators hunt. This threat feels real at a cellular level, even when the rational part of you knows it's noise. Here is where it gets dangerous. People on high alert for status drops don't just notice them, they manufacture them. You reinterpret neutral comments as insults. You see competence in others as a deliberate attempt to embarrass you. You pick fights to reassert dominance because silence feels like surrender. And then, ironically, this defensive scrambling is what actually causes people to pull away. They sense the hair trigger sensitivity and keep their distance or move closer to someone less exhausting. You have turned a false alarm into a real threat. The thing most people miss is that this detector got wired into you young. Maybe someone bigger used status as a weapon, or you learned that safety meant staying noticed. Now you are running ancient software in a world where most status shifts are meaningless. The move is not to ignore the detector, but to notice when it fires and ask what actually changed in my real standing versus what changed in my story about it. That gap is where the trap closes and where you get your power back. Silent scorekeeping. You remember the small thing your partner did 3 weeks ago, the comment at dinner, the forgotten errand, the way they didn't ask about your day. They've probably forgotten it entirely, but you haven't. You filed it away, and it sits there quietly, adding weight to a ledger no one else knows exists. This is scorekeeping, and it's one of the most lethal forms of relationship poison because it happens in complete silence. The person being scored against has no idea the game is even happening. A relationship built on unspoken tallies is like a house where one person is secretly moving walls every night. From the outside, everything looks fine. Inside, the structure is collapsing. What makes scorekeeping so dangerous is that it compounds. One forgotten thing might be forgivable, but by the time you've collected 5 or 6 or 20, your brain has rewritten the person's entire character. They become someone who doesn't care, not someone who had a bad week or a distracted moment. The score feels like proof. Your mind presents it as evidence of their indifference, their laziness, their cruelty, even if none of that is true. And here's where it gets really quiet. Resentment grows fastest in the dark because they don't know they're being judged, they can't respond, apologize, or change. They just sense that something has shifted. They feel colder toward you and don't understand why. So they pull back, and you score that too. The only way to break this cycle is almost absurdly simple. You have to speak the thing out loud before it hardens into evidence, not as an accusation, just, "This mattered to me." That admission stops the silent tallying before it becomes a wall between you. The favor that creates resentment. You help a friend move on a Saturday. It takes 4 hours, your back hurts, you miss something you wanted to do. A month later, they don't ask how you're doing. A year later, they haven't reciprocated. You catch yourself thinking about that weekend. Not fondly, the sting is still there. So what happened? You gave freely, yes, but somewhere in your nervous system, you also kept score. The favor became a debt in your mind the moment you extended it, even if you didn't know it at the time. This is the hidden arithmetic of generosity. We often give while secretly expecting return, then feel betrayed when the other person never signed the invisible contract we wrote alone. The trap is that you can't tell them about it, because then you'd have to admit that your gift wasn't actually a gift. It had conditions. You were buying something, maybe gratitude, maybe proof that they value you, maybe future obligation. The other person can sense this, not consciously always, but they feel the weight underneath the gesture. They feel watched. They feel indebted instead of grateful. And that tiny shift from feeling cared for to feeling obligated is where resentment starts to grow on both sides. The strange mercy is that the most powerful gifts are the ones you genuinely don't need back. Not because you're noble, but because you've decided in advance that this is yours to give, no return expected, no scoreboard kept. It removes the invisible tax. Try it. Next time you help someone, notice the moment after. Do you feel lighter, or do you feel like you've made a deposit? That feeling tells you whether you were actually generous or whether you were investing. The rival who smiles. You've met this person. Maybe they still work near you, or show up at family dinners, or message you asking how your project is going with a face full of warmth. Eyebrows raised, corners of mouth lifted, the whole thing radiating kindness. It feels genuine. But somewhere below that expression lives a wish that it fails. The smile is real and the wish is real, and they don't experience a contradiction between them. This is one of the hardest social puzzles to read because we're trained to trust smiles, taught from childhood that a genuine-looking face means genuine intent. The rival who smiles has learned that hostility spoken aloud creates resistance and distance, so they've moved it underground instead. They praise your work in the meeting and hope nobody buys it. They ask about your weekend and feel a small satisfaction when you mention something that costs money you probably don't have. The smile isn't a mask over cruelty. It's something stranger. They genuinely enjoy you, genuinely want to know you, and genuinely want to diminish you. Both can be true at the same time. Your brain wants to pick one, and it will pick the smile because smiles are older in our neurology than strategy. So you trust them slightly more than you should, which means you reveal slightly more than you should, which means they know exactly where to nudge. The dangerous part isn't that they're pretending. The dangerous part is that you can't be unkind back to someone who's been kind to you, even if the kindness was a long game played over months. That asymmetry, your guilt against their ambition, is where they live and thrive. Watch for the person whose smile never quite reaches the eyes when you get good news, or whose questions always seem to map your vulnerabilities. The moment you outgrow someone, there is no dramatic break. One day you realize mid-conversation that your oldest friend is still telling the same story about their boss from 2 years ago, and you feel nothing. Not boredom exactly, but a kind of hollow recognition that you are not in the same room anymore, even though you are sitting across from each other. The outgrowing happens so quietly that you almost miss it. You start noticing things you never saw before. The way they interrupt, the jokes that land wrong now, the fact that they ask about your life but never quite hear the answer. And the guilt arrives first, faster than relief. You feel like a traitor for changing. They did nothing wrong. They are the same person you chose. You are the one who moved. But here is what nobody tells you. The moment you outgrow someone, you become a mirror they do not want to look in. They sense the shift before you even say it. You have become evidence of what they could have been if they had also changed, also risked, also chosen the harder path. So they do not pull away gently. They often turn it around, make you the problem. Suddenly, you are too good for them now, or too busy, or not who they used to know. They will find small betrayals to justify the distance you both feel happening. And you will stand there wondering if you did something wrong, when really you just became something they are not. The kindest move is to grieve it quietly and let them have their anger. Trying to convince them you are still the same person only makes it worse. You are not. And that is actually okay. Tribal instinct against outsiders. You walk into a room where everyone knows each other and you are the new face. Within seconds, you feel it. Not rudeness exactly, but a subtle temperature drop. The conversation doesn't pause, but it tightens. A joke lands differently. You notice how easily they move together, the shortcuts in their language, the way they don't have to explain anything. You are not unsafe. You are just not us. This is not cruelty. This is your brain recognizing something deeper than conscious choice. Your tribe kept your ancestors alive. Being cast out meant death. So we evolved to spot insiders and outsiders with the precision of a hawk. A different accent, a value you don't share, the wrong school, the wrong neighborhood, the wrong way of laughing. Your nervous system flags it before your conscious mind catches up. And once someone is coded as outside, the rules change. You become more willing to overlook their qualities, dismiss their ideas, believe worse about their motives. Studies show we interpret the exact same behavior as threatening when it comes from an outsider, innocent when it comes from a friend. The dark part, and this is where betrayal lives, is that outsider status is not permanent. A trusted insider can flip to outsider in one decision. Vote the wrong way. Say the wrong thing at the dinner table. Leave the group's shared belief. And when they do, the tribe doesn't grieve the loss. It justifies the rejection. Suddenly, you see flaws in them you never saw before. Their past behavior rewrites itself as warning signs. You were never really close, were you? This is not your fault. But knowing how the mechanism works gives you a choice about whether to run it without thinking. Reciprocity turned into debt. You do something kind for someone and feel the warmth of it. They say thank you, they seem grateful, and you think the ledger is balanced. But then weeks pass and the weight settles in. An unspoken pressure that they now owe you something. Maybe it's not conscious, maybe you don't even admit it to yourself, but it's there, quietly keeping score. The original impulse is genuinely beautiful. Humans evolved to help each other, and we remember who helped us so we can return the favor. That's cooperation, and it built every civilization we know. The problem arrives when you help someone and then unconsciously expect the debt to be paid back exactly. Same size, same speed, same emotional weight, same style. When it isn't, something shifts inside you. They didn't call you back quickly enough. They didn't ask about your crisis the way you asked about theirs. They thanked you but moved on, seemingly unaffected by your sacrifice, your time, your worry. Now you're angry, but you can't quite explain why, because admitting it makes you sound small and transactional. What you actually wanted was gratitude that proved they understood. You wanted them to feel indebted. You wanted proof that your kindness mattered, that it was truly seen, that it created something sacred between you both. When they don't deliver that proof, you feel cheated. The gift becomes a transaction they failed to complete, and suddenly they're the ungrateful one. The real danger is quiet. The more you help from a place of invisible scorekeeping, the more likely you are to feel betrayed when they don't repay on your timeline. The gift silently becomes a loan, and you become the creditor. Check yourself before you give. Are you helping or are you lending? Because those two things feel nothing alike on the receiving end. The scapegoat mechanism. You've seen it happen in a group at work or a family or even in yourself. Tension builds until everyone is exhausted, then suddenly one person becomes the problem. Not because they did something worse than the others, but because naming them as the problem makes the group feel unified again. The anxiety dissolves, the blame lands, and the strange part is that it usually works, at least for a while. That person becomes the scapegoat, and collective relief masks collective guilt. This isn't about a single bad actor ruining things for everyone. It's much older and stranger than that. When a group has diffuse anger, nobody quite knowing where the real problem is or whose fault it is, naming a sacrificial target actually restores cohesion. The pressure valve opens, everyone stops fighting each other and points instead. You'll notice it most clearly when the scapegoat wasn't actually the cause of the original tension, yet once they're removed or blamed, the group's anxiety genuinely drops. That drop is intoxicating. It feels like justice. It feels like clarity. The trap is that groups that rely on scapegoating never actually solve the underlying problem. The tension returns. The group needs another sacrifice. So the mechanism repeats, and over time, the criteria for who gets blamed becomes smaller and stranger. A personality trait, an accent, a loyalty question, because the goal was never fairness. It was always about making the discomfort stop. If you find yourself in a group where one person is always the problem, where consensus feels easy because someone has already been decided against, you're inside a scapegoating cycle. The kindest move is not to participate, even if the relief is real. When helping makes you a target. Watch what happens when you pick up the slack. You solve a problem nobody else touched, you show up when it matters, and for one bright moment, everyone sees you as reliable. Then the frame shifts without announcement. Your helpfulness becomes expected. Your availability becomes assumed. Your boundaries evaporate into the background. Now, when you can't help, you're selfish. When you need something in return, you're ungrateful. When you finally say no, you've broken a promise you never made. The helper becomes the villain in someone else's story, and the cruelest part is you built it by being good. But underneath the resentment is something quieter and more structural than spite. You've created an implicit contract that only you can see. Everyone else has started reading you as a resource, not a person, but an infinite capacity machine. When resources don't stay constant and unconditional, when they show limits or need things back, people feel robbed. It's not malice exactly. It's a soft entitlement, so quiet you almost miss it happening in real time. The people closest to you built their world around a version of you that doesn't require rest, doesn't have competing needs, never gets tired. When real you shows up, hungry, exhausted, with your own problems sitting on your chest, it feels to them like theft, like you're taking something that was promised. The move isn't to stop helping. It's to help in a way that makes your humanness visible from day one. Let people see your limits before they construct their entire lives around your unlimited self. Tell them early what you can and cannot do. Make boundaries boring and normal. Just another season, another threshold. That's not less generous. That's the only framework that doesn't turn around and devour you later. The comparison wound. You know that tight feeling in your chest when you see someone else get something you wanted? Not because you hate them, but because your brain just did the math in real time and decided you lost. That's the comparison wound, and it's less about what they have and more about what your mind whispers you don't. Your friend gets the promotion you both interviewed for, your ex posts a photo with someone new, your colleague's book deal lands before yours. In each moment, your brain isn't calculating actual loss. It's running a betrayal algorithm, asking why them and not me, and if the answer feels like unfairness, something small inside you starts to turn cold toward that person. They didn't do anything to you. They just existed in the space where you wanted to be first. The vicious part is that comparison wounds often target people close to you, people you're supposed to celebrate. Your brain treats their win as your public failure, as if you're both in the same audition room and the casting director just pointed at them. It transforms a neutral fact into evidence of your inadequacy, and suddenly the person becomes the symbol of that evidence. You find reasons to diminish their success. You tell the story differently. You distance. What started as a wound inflicted by your own mind becomes a rift that feels like their fault. The only move that actually works is the hard one. Catching yourself in that comparison moment and getting curious instead of defensive. Ask what you're actually grieving, the thing they have or the version of yourself you thought you'd be by now. Usually it's the second, and that grief belongs to you alone to process, not to weaponize against someone else's joy. Perceived arrogance in success. Watch what happens the moment someone you know lands what they wanted, a promotion, a book deal, a relationship upgrade, and suddenly the room feels different, even though nothing physically changed. Your brain starts reading their confidence as smugness, their directness as coldness, their boundary setting as rejection. You weren't hunting for these patterns before. Success switched on a detector you didn't know existed. The person who was honest last year is now arrogant. The one who was driven is now cold or thinks they're better than everyone. What actually happened is simpler and uglier. You're comparing yourself to them in a way you couldn't before, and their win became your mirror. That mirror showed you something painful, so your brain did what it does best. It reframed their success as a character flaw instead of a fact. This is brutal because they often have no idea. They're not performing arrogance. You're performing the role of the scorned witness, casting them as the villain to make sense of why they move past you. They might try to stay humble, to include you, to prove they haven't changed. But you won't trust it because now the gap between you has a name, and arrogance is easier to live with than envy. The jealousy stays quieter when you blame them for changing instead of admitting their move forward felt like a move away from you. Before you write someone off as transformed by success, sit with this. What about you shifted when they succeeded? Are you hearing them differently, or are you hurting differently? Are they showing you genuinely new sides, or are you searching harder for flaws because the distance feels unbearable? The answer might sting, but it's the only one that tells you what's really happening. The withdrawal of approval. Think about the last time someone stopped smiling at your jokes. Not a cold moment, just a subtle fade. The warmth you'd come to expect simply wasn't there anymore. You probably felt it before you could name it. A small drop in your chest, a quick mental scramble to figure out what shifted. That's the withdrawal of approval, and it works like a thermostat someone else controls. We're wired to track approval the way plants track light, and when it drops, something in us goes on high alert. You start replaying conversations, wondering if you said something wrong, if you've become less interesting, less worthy. The dangerous part? The person withdrawing approval often doesn't need to say a word, a short text instead of a phone call, less interest in your stories, the usual laugh missing, a delayed response where there used to be speed. This silence does more work than any confrontation could, because confrontation at least gives you something to fight against or fix. Withdrawal is fog. It makes you feel like you're disappearing to them, and that fear can make you try harder, apologize for things you didn't do, or accept that you've been downgraded in their world. The real trap is that approval withdrawal works so well because it's ambiguous. You can't quite grab hold of it, can't argue against a feeling, can't prove you're still worthy when the proof was always their attention and now it's rationed or gone. If you recognize someone doing this to you, the move isn't to chase the warmth back. It's to notice the pattern, get honest about whether you actually need their approval that badly, and start building your sense of worth somewhere that won't get controlled by someone else's mood. Contempt masked as advice. Your mom calls about your relationship. She doesn't say, "I think he's wrong for you." Instead, "Oh, honey, I'm just worried." People like that sometimes have commitment issues, you know. I've just seen it happen. The poison is in the care. She sounds concerned, maybe even a little sad for you, but what she's really doing is inserting doubt, soft, deniable, lethal. This is contempt wearing a cardigan. Contempt is the belief that someone is beneath you, that their judgment cannot be trusted, that they need your correction more than they need your faith. But contempt is ugly when it's naked. So it dresses up. It becomes, "I'm telling you this because I love you." It becomes, "I wouldn't say this to anyone else, but you need to hear it." It becomes the knowing pause, the tight smile, the slight head tilt that says, "I see what you don't." Here's what makes it dangerous. Advice feels like a gift. Your brain categorizes it as help. But when someone offers you guidance wrapped in the assumption that you're too blind or too foolish to see clearly, they're not giving you information. They're giving you a demotion. And the person on the receiving end usually feels it, even if they can't name it. A small shame blooms, then resentment, then distance. The person offering the contempt advice often doesn't see themselves doing it. They genuinely believe they're helping. But belief doesn't change what's happening. The gap between "I trust your judgment even if I choose differently" and "you're not seeing what's obvious" is the difference between a relationship that survives disagreement and one that doesn't. Pay attention to how advice is offered to you. Better yet, notice how you offer it to others. The audience effect on cruelty. Think of the person you know who turns absolutely vicious online but soft-spoken in person. That shift is not a glitch. It is a feature of your nervous system, and it activates faster than you realize. When someone feels watched by a crowd that shares their anger, the part of the brain that normally whispers, "Slow down, this might hurt," goes quiet. An audience does not just witness cruelty, it rewires the permission to deliver it. A group laughing at a joke at someone's expense feels fundamentally different from the same joke told alone in a car. One feels dangerous and alive. One feels fun and safe. Your brain knows the difference, and it adjusts your throttle accordingly. This is why pylons happen so fast online. Each new person joining the chorus makes cruelty feel less like a choice and more like a natural response, almost inevitable. Soldiers massacre civilians they would never harm alone. Mobs beat strangers to death in the grip of collective certainty. Office workers gang up on one colleague with a viciousness none of them would dare in isolation. The crowd is not just permission, it is transformation, a kind of alchemy that turns individuals into something else entirely. Remove the audience, put that person back in their car or their bedroom, and the cruelty often collapses into shame or confusion. The energy that felt righteous now feels poisonous. The unstable truth is that much of your kindness or cruelty depends less on your actual character and more on who is watching and what they seem to want from you. Next time you feel anger rising in a group, try this. Step back mentally, imagine that crowd is gone, and ask if you would still say it. That small imaginary distance might be the only thing between you and a version of yourself you will not recognize later. In-group betrayal punishment. There's a reason the friend who leaves the group gets treated worse than the outsider who was never part of it. Someone leaves your friend circle, switches teams, admits they don't believe what the group believes anymore, and suddenly they become the target of a focused, almost savage kind of social erasure. You'll hear it in the small cruelties, jokes about their character, carefully revised versions of shared history, a kind of cold, institutional forgetting. The outsider who disagrees with you might stay neutral in your mind, but the insider who leaves, they feel like a traitor because at some level they are, not to a cause, but to the group's sense of itself. That's the punch beneath it all. When someone belongs to your tribe and then opts out, they are implicitly saying the tribe is not worth staying in. They are making a statement about everyone who remains. It stings like a personal rejection because it is. Groups need their members to believe in the group's coherence, its rightness, its inevitability. The defector challenges all three. So the punishment isn't proportional to the betrayal. It's proportional to the threat. An outsider can be wrong. A member who leaves says something much darker, that the inside wasn't actually sacred. Watch how differently people treat an ex-friend versus someone they never knew at all. The intensity of dislike, the need to diminish them, the rewriting of their character, all of it is a group immune response. The body recognizes a threat from within as more dangerous than a wound from without. Next time you feel that surge of anger towards someone who left, notice what you're really protecting. Not the group's mission, but the group's certainty that you made the right choice staying. The threat of your growth. There's a moment when someone who knew you before your shift starts treating you differently and you can't quite name it. Maybe you got sober. Maybe you landed the thing. Maybe you started saying no to things that used to keep you small. And suddenly the old crew feels distant, or they make jokes that land harder than they used to, or they find ways to remind you of who you used to be. It's not jealousy exactly, it's something deeper and meaner. You're showing them a mirror they don't want to look into. Your growth is a quiet accusation. When you change, people around you have to either change too or admit they're not willing to. Most people choose to push back. They'll call you different, stuck up, too serious now, like you think you're better than them. What they're really saying is, stay small so I don't have to feel small. It's a form of social gravity. People who've settled into their limitations will unconsciously pull you back down because your escape feels like a judgment of their choices. They might not even know they're doing it, but you'll feel it in the cooling tone of old friends, in how your wins get minimized, in that voice that says, "Remember when you were fun?" The trap is believing them, believing that staying stuck would somehow prove your love, that growing quietly or apologizing for your own becoming is how you keep people. Real ones don't ask you to shrink. So when someone starts treating your forward motion like a betrayal, that's not information about you. That's information about what they're ready for. And that answer might be the kindest clarity you get. Whispered coalition building. You felt it happen without a word being said, that moment when you walk into a room and suddenly two people who were neutral about you last week are now exchanging the tiniest glance, a shared smirk, the kind of synchronization that only happens between allies. Nobody called a meeting, but somehow an invisible coalition formed and you became the other. This is whispered coalition building, and it's happening everywhere, at work, in families, in friend groups, anywhere people need to consolidate power without it looking like a coup. The mechanics are almost elegant in their cruelty. One person plants a small seed of doubt about you, not an accusation, just a question, a hesitation in their voice, "Have you noticed how," delivered to exactly the right person. That person doesn't have to agree openly. They just have to nod, to remember, to mention it to someone else. No votes, no formal declaration, just a feeling spreading like a root system underground, connecting people who might not even like each other but suddenly share a common interest in keeping you small. The stickiest trap is how deniable it all becomes. Call it out and you look paranoid. Confront the first person and they feign confusion. Try to defend yourself and you're playing defense in a game nobody's officially playing. The coalition gains power precisely because it stays whispered, because it lives in the space between conversations, in the pause before someone returns your call. Watch for when people stop making eye contact the way they used to, when group texts change rhythm, when invitations thin. That's often when the network is already woven tight and you're only just beginning to notice the strings tightening around you. The mirror people hate seeing. Think of the last time someone gave you honest feedback about something you're doing wrong. Not angry feedback, real, careful feedback. Notice what happened in your body. A little hot, a little tight. Maybe you agreed on the surface, nodded, said thanks, and then spent the next 3 days mentally dismantling their credibility. They don't get it. They're jealous. They were in a bad mood. See how fast we can rewrite the source? People hate mirrors because mirrors don't care about your story. A mirror just reflects. It doesn't apologize for showing you the thing you've been avoiding. And the thing is, you already knew, part of you, that small voice that watched you make the same choice again, or heard the sharpness in your own voice, or noticed the lie you told yourself that morning. But knowing and having to look are completely different. Knowing is private. A mirror makes it public, or at least makes you accountable to it. So we reject the mirror, sometimes violently. We attack the person holding it, question their motives, their taste, their right to speak. We do this because accepting the reflection means we have to change something, and change is the one thing every defended self resists. Here's what's worth watching. The people in your life who stay calm when you reject their feedback are not giving up on you. They're treating you like an adult who can choose, eventually, to look. The people who get angry or stop trying are often just protecting themselves from the sting of knowing you won't. Be someone who can take a real mirror, not because the mirror is always right, but because you stay yourself either way. Preemptive rejection. You walk into a room and feel the temperature shift. Your mind immediately drafts a story. They already don't like me, so you beat them to it. You make a joke at your own expense before anyone else can. You downplay your idea before presenting it. You apologize for existing before they can be annoyed. What you are actually doing is handing them permission to reject you first, which feels safer than waiting to be rejected later. There is a backwards logic to it. If you reject yourself, at least you control the narrative and get to be the author of the ending instead of the victim of it. The trap is that preemptive rejection works. It feels protective in the moment. You soften the blow. You lower their expectations, but it also trains people to see you exactly as you announce yourself, smaller, less capable, less worthy. They take your self-deprecation at face value and treat you accordingly. Over time, you become the role you kept rehearsing. More subtly, people sense the preemptive move, and it creates distance. They can feel you bracing for rejection, and that bracing reads as unavailability, as someone who has already left the room emotionally. The pattern usually started early. A parent who was conditional, a sibling who mocked, a schoolyard moment that taught you rejection was inevitable. So you learn to strike first, to make rejection hurt less by making it familiar. But rejection you choose feels fundamentally different from rejection that finds you unbidden. When you stop announcing yourself as unworthy, when you let yourself take up the space you actually occupy, people have room to surprise you. They might actually stay. They might actually listen. That unfamiliarity will feel terrifying at first. Your nervous system will scream that danger is coming. Stay anyway. The move is small, but it rewires everything. The generosity trap. You buy someone coffee, small thing. Their face stays flat even as they say thanks. You lend a friend $200 when they're in a corner, and weeks pass before they start dodging your calls. Why does kindness so often curdle into distance? Because you just made them feel small, and people will quietly resent you for it, sometimes without even knowing why themselves. The generosity trap isn't about your intentions going wrong. It's about what happens inside someone when they're suddenly on the receiving end of your help. There's a moment right after you say yes when something shifts in how they see you. You're no longer a peer. You're the one with the extra, the one who has room to give. And that gap, that tiny imbalance, starts working like a low-level infection in the relationship, spreading without anyone naming it. They'll find ways to reassert themselves, to prove they're not less than. Sometimes through distance, sometimes through subtle cuts, sometimes by treating you like you owe them something, as if your help never happened at all. The cruel part is that the bigger your gesture, the stronger the invisible sting. Massive help can flip someone's entire emotional baseline around you. They shift from gratitude into defensive resentment, almost like your kindness held up a mirror they don't want to look into. To navigate this, stop thinking of generosity as a deposit in some favor bank. The moment you do that, the other person feels the ledger too. Instead, give what you genuinely don't need back. Let it disappear into the world without expectation. And if someone's about to become a repeat taker, get comfortable saying no early before the power dynamic hardens into something that poisons the whole thing. Face saving through blame. You've seen it happen at dinner tables and in offices alike. Someone makes a mistake, their face flushes hot, and in the next breath, they're telling you why it's actually someone else's fault. Not because they're evil, but because admitting failure in real time feels like drowning. The brain does something primitive in those moments. It reaches for blame like a life raft. A coworker did incomplete work? Well, you gave them bad instructions. You missed a deadline? The client kept moving the goalposts. You were short with someone? They were being difficult. It's not delusion, not really. It's a neural shortcut called self-affirmation bias, and it fires up before your rational mind even wakes up. Here's what makes it stick. When you blame someone else, your shame shrinks fast. Your social status feels safe. Your image stays intact. The hit of relief is real enough that the brain learns to do it again next time. The cost, though, lives in other people's faces. They watch you rewrite the facts in real time, and something cracks in how they see you. Not because you failed, everyone fails, but because you couldn't own it. The ones who survive close relationships and their reputation are the rare people who can pause right there in that hot moment and say it plainly, I messed up. That's not weakness performing as strength. That's actual strength, because the second you admit the truth, you take the power back. The story stops being about your competence and starts being about your character. People remember the person who can look them in the eye and say what actually happened. They never forget the person who rewrites history to save face. The loyalty ledger closes. There is a moment in most deep relationships where you realize the other person has stopped keeping score. They have stopped counting how many times they showed up for you, how many favors went unrepaid, how many nights they listened to your problems. That moment feels like grace, but it is actually the moment the ledger closes. And once it closes, what you did or did not do for them becomes almost irrelevant. The debt is settled not because you paid it back, but because they stopped believing you ever would. You have moved from partner to permanent debtor in their internal accounting, and permanent debtors get treated differently. They get less patience. They get less benefit of the doubt. A small slight becomes evidence of your true nature. A canceled plan becomes confirmation that you never cared. The loyalty ledger does not close when someone forgives you. It closes when they stop expecting anything from you at all. That shift is invisible at first. They are still kind. They still show up. But the contract has changed. You are no longer someone they invest in. You are someone they manage. And people manage obligations very differently than they manage relationships. They become efficient. They protect themselves first. They stop the slow bleeding of emotional generosity because they have already written you off as a loss. The saddest part is that many people never know when their ledger closed, so they keep acting like the old rules still apply. They think one more apology, one more gesture, one more proof of devotion will reopen it. But the ledger does not reopen. It just gathers dust while you stand there with flowers they no longer believe you meant to bring. Displaced anger targeting. Your boss tears into you during a meeting. She's wrong, unfair, and you swallow it because you need the job. 2 hours later, you snap at your partner for leaving a dish in the sink, something that normally wouldn't touch you. You're not actually angry about the dish. You're carrying the weight of that meeting, and your partner became the closest available target. That's displacement, and your nervous system pulled it off so cleanly you didn't even feel the redirect until the damage was already spreading through the room. Here's what makes it lethal in relationships. The person you snapped at has zero context for why the intensity landed so hard. They defend themselves. You feel unheard. They feel attacked. A small moment turns into proof that you don't respect them. And suddenly you're both fighting about something that has nothing to do with what's actually wrong. The real culprit, your boss, the powerlessness, the humiliation, stays invisible. And the two of you end up at war with the wrong enemy entirely. Displacement also lets you feel less helpless. You couldn't fight back at the source, so redirecting that energy towards someone you actually have power over feels like agency. Even though it's the opposite, you're spreading the wound to the one person who didn't deserve it. The move is brutal honesty, and it has to happen fast. before the moment hardens into pattern. If you catch yourself angry beyond proportion, pause and ask where it's actually coming from, not as an excuse, but as raw information. Then tell your partner, I'm carrying something from earlier and I'm about to dump it on you unfairly. I need to step back. That sentence does more repair than any apology after the damage sets. It breaks the chain before resentment gets its hooks in. The pedestal before the fall. Think about the person you admired most, maybe a parent, a teacher, a mentor, someone whose approval felt like currency. Now think about the moment you found out they weren't who you thought, not because they changed, but because you finally saw clearly. That shift is violent. We don't love people, you realize. We love the versions we've invented. When someone is on a pedestal, you are not actually looking at them. You are looking up. The angle distorts everything. Their flaws disappear into shadow. Their selfishness reads as strength. Their brittleness reads as mystery. You project competence onto silence, depth onto a single clever sentence. The higher the pedestal, the harder your brain works to keep the fantasy running. Doubt is exhausting, so you ignore small contradictions. You reframe red flags as quirks. You rationalize behavior that doesn't add up. You tell yourself, I'm the only one who really understands them. That sentence is the warning bell. When you need to be the special decoder of someone's behavior, when you find yourself making excuses that nobody else would make, you are already deep in the lie. Here is what breaks people. The pedestal doesn't come down slowly. It collapses all at once. All that projected light inverts into darkness. The person you defended becomes the person you despise. Friends wonder why you suddenly hate them. The truth is, you hate yourself for believing. Disappointment is not the opposite of admiration. It is admiration broken in half. So notice when you are looking up. Notice when someone's silence feels wise instead of just silent. Notice when you start doing the small work of defense, the quiet reframing that only you understand. That awareness doesn't kill real connection. It stops you from building a house of cards and living inside it. Social proof against you. You make a joke at a dinner table, nobody laughs. Then someone else says almost the same thing 2 minutes later, and suddenly everyone's howling. It's not the words that changed, it's the permission structure. When the group signal is that something is funny, smart, or safe, people relax into agreement. When the signal reads differently, they brace. And here's the trap that catches you. Once a few people decide you're the wrong kind of person, social proof flips into a weapon. Someone mentions you doubted them once. They're believed instantly because the narrative soil is already tilled. The next person adds a small exaggeration. Nobody questions it because others are nodding. Before you know it, you are the guy who always does something you did once, or the woman everyone knows is like that. The group memory rewrites itself. What makes this particularly brutal is that people aren't lying. They genuinely remember it that way. Their brain has filed you under a category, and the filing cabinet now sorts every story into that folder. A neutral comment becomes proof of your coldness. A busy day becomes evidence of your selfishness. The original facts barely matter anymore. The social consensus has its own gravity. The real danger isn't that one person turns against you. It's that people stop investigating your side at all because the group has already spoken. They're not being mean. They're just following the proof their friends provided. That's why the earliest accusations matter so much. They set the frame and they're sticky. Everyone else after that is just confirming what's already been decided, not questioning whether the decision was ever sound to begin with. The crowd doesn't need facts once it has a story. When vulnerability invites attack, you tell someone you're scared, really scared, about money, about failing, about whether you're enough. And in that moment of exposure, you watch their face change. The warmth drains. They get quiet or suddenly sharp. Maybe they use what you said later, twist it, weaponize it. You think, how did my honesty become ammunition? The answer is darker than you might want to admit. Vulnerability is a signal. When someone sees you without armor, two ancient things happen at once. One part of them recognizes the courage and draws closer. The other part smells an opening. Not everyone has the maturity to sit with someone else's fear without exploiting it. Some people are wired to turn confession into leverage, not because they're cartoonish villains, but because power imbalances make them nervous, and dominance feels like safety. When you remove your walls, you temporarily trade control for connection. But connection requires something most people don't have, the ability to hold someone's rawness without using it. The real trap is that vulnerability often makes the wrong people feel threatened. Someone insecure, someone nursing old resentments, someone who's learned that emotions are weaknesses. They see your honest fear and feel suddenly exposed themselves. So they attack first. They weaponize your confession to prove they're stronger, safer, less breakable. It's not rational. It's reptile brain dressed in words. Here's what cuts deepest. You can't always tell in advance who will betray vulnerability and who will honor it. You can only notice the pattern after it happens. Pay attention to how someone responds the first time you're real, not whether they agree with you, whether they treat your exposed parts as sacred or ammunition. That tells you everything. The competence penalty: you crush a project at work. You solve the problem nobody else could touch. You're calm, efficient, and the results speak for themselves. And somehow, somewhere in that room, people start watching you differently, not with admiration, with a certain kind of distance. They stop inviting you to things. Your mistakes, which used to roll off, now get mentioned in meetings. What just happened? You've triggered what researchers call the competence penalty. When you become visibly more capable than the group, you shift from insider to something else entirely. You are now a threat to the social contract. Everyone else in that space has an invisible rank order built on who they trust, who they're comfortable around, who makes them feel secure in their own skin. Your excellence destabilizes it. Here's the trap. People don't hate you for being good. They resent you for making them feel small. And because that's an uncomfortable thing to admit out loud, it gets dressed up as something else: jealousy, arrogance, a personality flaw. You become too intense, too much, too eager. Suddenly, your confidence reads as coldness. Your focus reads as unfriendliness. The cruelest part is that softening doesn't always work either. If you dial back your competence to smooth things over, you're now playing small in a space where you actually have something to give. If you don't, you're the outsider no matter what you do. The move isn't to hide. It's to make your competence feel collaborative instead of lone. Include people in the solution. Ask questions that make them part of the thinking. Make them look smart in the process of you being smart. That's how you stay capable without becoming the exile. Gratitude that curdles. You do something kind for someone, really kind, the kind that costs you time, money, or sleep, and for a week, maybe two, they're grateful. They mention it. They thank you again, but then something shifts. The gratitude gets quiet. Then it vanishes entirely. Then, and this is where it gets strange, they start acting like you owe them something for all the help you've given, or like you were trying to buy their approval, or like the whole thing was about you feeling good about yourself. You're confused. You gave freely. You asked for nothing. Yet somehow you've become the bad guy in a story you didn't write. This happens because gratitude, when it survives too long in someone's chest without being fully expressed, doesn't stay warm. It ferments. It curdles into resentment. The person doesn't dislike you for what you did. They dislike you because your generosity made them feel small. It highlighted a gap they didn't want to see, that they needed help, that they couldn't do it alone, that they are not self-sufficient. Worse, you witnessed that moment, and as long as they're grateful, they have to sit with the feeling of owing you. So their mind finds a way out. It reframes the gift. It decides you had hidden motives. It decides you were patronizing. It decides the help was conditional, even if it wasn't. Now, the debt is gone. The discomfort is justified, and you're simply someone who tried to humble them. The trap is almost elegant. The kinder you are to people with fragile self-images, the more likely you are to eventually become their enemy. They don't hate you for helping. They hate you for mattering, and they'll punish you for it when the shame becomes unbearable. The insider who defects. There's a moment, maybe you've lived it, when someone who knows you best suddenly becomes your most effective enemy, not because they learned anything new about you, but because they already knew everything. They were inside the walls. They watched how you operate when no one's looking. And then one day, something breaks the spell, and they weaponize all that intimate knowledge against you. That shift from ally to defector is brutal in ways a stranger's betrayal can never quite match. What makes an insider defection so lethal is the asymmetry of information. A new enemy has to guess at your weak spots, your fears, your patterns. An insider doesn't guess. They know exactly which words will land, which insecurities will bloom, which people matter most to you, and how to poison those relationships with precision. They know the story you tell yourself about yourself, and they can tell a different story using the same facts. Usually, it's not a dramatic moral awakening that triggers the flip. It's smaller, a perceived slight, a feeling of not being valued, the slow burn of resentment at how you treat them versus how you treat others. And here's the trap. Your past kindness becomes evidence against you. I gave you everything, and you still becomes the narrative. They rewrite the history of your friendship to justify the scorched earth they're about to unleash. The ugliest part is how they'll tell themselves they're being honest, finally saying what everyone was thinking. They wrap betrayal in righteousness, and because they know you, people believe them. That's the real damage. Not what they say, but how much credibility they carry when they say it. Someone who just met you can lie. Someone who lived inside your life gets mistaken for a truth teller, and that mistake follows you long after they're gone. Moral licensing to harm. You donate $50 to a charity and feel like a good person for the rest of the week. That feeling is real, and it does something quiet inside you. It lowers your guard. A coworker asks a small favor later, something ethically gray, and you find yourself saying yes when you normally wouldn't. Not because the favor is suddenly justified, but because you have a moral credit in your account and spending a little feels earned. The science is stark. You are more likely to discriminate, to lie, to take shortcuts, to ignore someone's pain right after you have done something generous or public-facing that made you feel like you belong to the tribe of decent humans. A man marches for a cause, posts about it, feels the warm social validation, and then dismisses a woman's concern with stunning coldness because he already proved to himself he is one of the good ones. A parent volunteers at school, feels noble, and then shames their kid for a small mistake with harshness they would never tolerate from a stranger. The harm is not calculated. It flows from feeling secure enough in your own goodness that you stop checking yourself. Here is the kicker. The more public your virtue, the more licensed you feel to be private with your cruelty. The people closest to you already know this. They have watched you post the right thing, then turn around and treat them with coldness that does not match the person you showed the world. Before you feel too safe in your own righteousness, ask what small permission you just gave yourself, what callousness slipped in under the cover of that good deed. The dehumanizing label. You've done it without thinking. Someone cuts you off in traffic and suddenly they're not a person rushing to the hospital or distracted by devastating news. They're a jerk, a moron, a single word that shrinks them down to the worst thing they did in that moment. The label is fast, it feels true, and it changes everything about how you treat them next. That word is a trap door your brain uses to escape the hard work of seeing complexity. And once someone gets labeled, your brain stops updating. You don't need to reconsider them because you've already filed them away. In groups, this becomes devastating. When we label people as toxic, crazy, selfish, or worse, we're not just naming behavior, we're erasing the person underneath. The label sticks, it becomes their identity. And once you've labeled someone, you stop noticing the ways they contradict the label, the moments they were kind or afraid or trying. History shows us where this leads. Genocides don't start with mass violence. They start with a language that makes a group feel less human. Them becomes those people becomes something we convince ourselves isn't quite like us. On a smaller scale, this happens in families, workplaces, friendships. Whenever one person decides another person's story is over and they know exactly who they are, the label saves energy. It feels like clarity. But what you've really done is stop looking. The antidote isn't naive optimism or pretending people don't have real patterns. It's noticing the exact moment you've started describing someone as one fixed thing and asking yourself what you've stopped seeing because of it. The label is convenient. The person is always more complicated than the word. Fear dressed as morality. You've seen it happen. Someone you trusted suddenly becomes righteous about something you've always done, and they make it sound like they're protecting the world. What shifted? Not the world, them. And usually, something scared them first. Fear is a shapeshifter. When we feel threatened, whether it's financial, social, or existential, our brain reaches for the nearest costume, and morality is the perfect fit. It's airtight. It lets you attack without looking like you're afraid. If you frame your discomfort as principle, you're no longer the one with the problem. Everyone else is. It's brilliant, really, except it ruins trust in ways that raw fear never would. A person who says, "I'm scared of losing control," is vulnerable, fixable, almost human. But a person who says, "This is morally wrong," has drawn a line in concrete. They've made it impossible to negotiate because negotiation feels like compromise, and compromise feels like moral collapse, like they'd be betraying something sacred. Watch for the pattern. Someone's world gets smaller, job loss, betrayal, losing status, a relationship fracture, and suddenly they develop strong opinions about things they never cared about before. They're not lying exactly. The fear is real, and their nervous system truly is organizing around a genuine threat. But the threat isn't what they're naming. It's the ground shifting under them, and they need something solid to stand on. The antidote isn't argument. It's understanding that righteousness often has a trembling person underneath. That doesn't make their accusations okay, doesn't excuse the damage they do, but it does explain why they can say harsh things with such unwavering certainty. They need the certainty more than they need the truth, maybe more than they need you. The exit that triggers rage. You know that moment when someone leaves in the middle of a conversation, not angrily, just quietly, and suddenly the other person goes nuclear? The one who was calm 5 seconds ago is now shouting, listing grievances, even chasing them down the hallway. It's as if the act of leaving itself became the betrayal. This isn't about what was said, it's about the loss of control. When someone leaves, they take the argument with them. They take your chance to win, to be heard, to force them to understand. Rage is often just panic dressed up in fury, and nothing triggers that panic faster than the other person opting out entirely. You can't keep arguing with someone who walks away. You can't prove your point to an empty room. So the mind does what it always does under threat. It escalates. It makes the leaving the crime. It rewrites the whole conversation backward, hunting for evidence that they never cared, that they were always selfish, that this proves exactly what you've always suspected about them. What makes this pattern so sticky is that the person leaving often feels they have no choice. Maybe the argument is going nowhere. Maybe they're protecting themselves from more pain. But to the person left behind, that exit reads as abandonment, as refusal, as judgment. And judgment more than disagreement is what people can't tolerate. It feels like erasure, like they have already decided you're not worth the fight. The next time you feel that hot spike when someone walks away, ask yourself, am I angry about what happened, or am I angry that I can't control what happens next? That single question might save you from burning a relationship over the wrong trigger entirely. Resentment of the messenger. You tell a friend something they need to hear. Maybe their partner is cheating. Maybe their boss thinks they're lazy. Maybe they've become the person nobody wants at parties. And instead of thanking you, they get cold. Suddenly you're the problem. They stop returning texts. They tell other people you're jealous or cruel or just trying to tear them down. The truth didn't land, you did. This is what happens when information threatens identity, and it's one of the cleanest ways to understand why people turn against the people closest to them. The brain doesn't separate the message from the messenger. When news arrives that makes someone feel small, ashamed, or exposed, the mind often reaches for a faster solution than sitting with the discomfort. It decides you sent it to hurt them. You wanted them to feel bad. You're the enemy. The real sting is that truth-telling can feel like betrayal because it strips away whatever story they've been using to feel okay about themselves, so they don't hate what you said. They hate what you made them see, and the only way to stop seeing it is to stop seeing you. This is why people often become closest to those who tell them comfortable lies and distant from those who told them hard things years ago. The human mind is built to protect the image it has of itself, not to upgrade it. Before you deliver something true to someone you care about, understand this: you might lose them anyway. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right, and they're not ready to hold both that truth and their sense of self at the same time. The price of honesty is sometimes the person you told it to, the unspoken hierarchy shift. You've probably felt it the moment it happened, not as words, but as a temperature drop. Someone who used to defer to you, laugh at your jokes, ask your opinion, suddenly treats you like a peer, maybe even less. They don't look at you the same way in meetings. Their tone shifts. They stop seeking your validation. And you can't quite name when it flipped, but you felt it like a trapdoor opening beneath your feet. What you sensed was a hierarchy recalibration, and it happens silently, almost always before anyone speaks it aloud. Humans are status tracking machines. Your brain is constantly updating who ranks where in any room, any relationship, any text chain. You don't think about it. It's running in the background like an algorithm you never consented to. The moment someone perceives you as less useful, less confident, less connected, or less relevant than they thought, the math changes, and they feel it more than they know it. A person who stops asking your advice isn't being intentionally cruel. Their nervous system has already filed you under lower priority. The friendship or working relationship hasn't ended. The hierarchy has just shifted down, and everything else flows from that. The trap is that you sense the downgrade emotionally, rejection, betrayal, coldness, before you understand it as a status recalibration. So you react defensively, trying to win back closeness when what actually happened was visibility dimmed. The person isn't angry, they've just mentally moved you to a different row. If you want the dynamic to shift back, you need to shift what they perceive about your relevance, not argue about their feelings. Small moves, deliver something valuable, be harder to access, demonstrate you've leveled up. The hierarchy speaks louder than any apology ever will. When boundaries feel like betrayal, you say no to someone you love and they go quiet in a way that feels worse than anger. They don't yell, they just act like you've carved out a piece of them you used to own. That silence is the real wound, and it works on you for days. What you just did from their angle wasn't a boundary. It was rejection dressed up in reasonable language. And here's the trap. They might be right to feel that way, which makes you second-guess yourself into small pieces. The people closest to us often learned early that love and access were the same thing. If you gave them time, your body, your money, your emotional labor without question, that proved you cared. So when you draw a line, even a sane one, even a necessary one, their nervous system reads it as loss. Not loss of a privilege, loss of proof that they matter. They might tell you they understand. Then they'll send a text at midnight that somehow makes you feel guilty for leaving them on read that day. They'll remember small ways you've disappointed them, and suddenly you're not the person who said no. You're the person who never really loved them the way they needed. The cruelest part is that some of this logic runs so deep in them, they don't even recognize it as a choice. They think they're just being honest about how much you've changed. What actually changed is that you stopped erasing yourself to keep them calm. But because they built their sense of safety on your absence, on the space you disappeared into, your presence, your real, boundaried self, feels like a kind of abandonment they'll never quite forgive. And that weight is theirs to carry now, not yours. The crab bucket instinct. Put a crab in a bucket and it will try to climb out. Put two crabs in that same bucket and something shifts. The moment one crab gets close to the rim, the other one pulls it back down. No discussion, no strategy. Just a reflex born from scarcity and a world where one creature's escape feels like another creature's death sentence. This is not cruelty. It is survival math written into bone. You see this everywhere, just wearing different clothes. A friend gets a promotion and suddenly your group chat goes quiet. A family member loses weight and the dinner table fills with comments about how restrictive they're being. Someone leaves the job everyone hates, and instead of envy, there is a slow wave of resentment. like they committed a betrayal by proving escape was possible. The person who climbs out becomes the threat, not the inspiration. Here is what makes it stick so deep. The crab pulling down does not consciously hate the climbing crab. They are acting from a place so primal it feels like truth. If you climb out, I stay in the bucket. Your win tastes like my loss. And when resources feel genuinely tight, money, attention, opportunity, that fear has real teeth. It does not matter that success is not zero-sum. It feels like it is, and feelings run the show. The trap for you is this. People closest to you often hold the rope tightest, not because they are bad, but because your escape makes their bucket feel emptier, their situation more real. Recognize that the pulling back is reflex, not judgment. Sometimes the kindest move is distance. Not anger, just the clarity that you cannot climb toward light with hands dragging you down. Projection of hidden guilt. You've probably noticed how the person most angry about betrayal is often the one doing the betraying, or how someone will accuse you of coldness the exact moment they're treating you poorly. There's a dark logic to it, and it starts with a feeling you can't quite sit with. When you do something that contradicts who you believe you are, cut someone off, lie to spare yourself, ghost a friend, that gap between your self-image and your actions creates unbearable pressure. Your brain has a solution. Find evidence that they deserved it, that they're the kind of person who do the same thing, that they're actually guilty of what you just did. It's projection, but it's powered by guilt. The accusation becomes a mirror held up backward, so you see their faults magnified while your own stay hidden. What makes this especially damaging in relationships is the certainty that comes with it. You're not guessing. You feel the truth of their guilt in your bones. That feeling is real, but it's not evidence. It's emotional momentum dressed up as clarity. The person on the receiving end of this gets trapped in a strange position, defending themselves against charges that are secretly confessions. They try to prove they're loyal, honest, kind, all the things you're actually worried about being seen as failing at yourself. Meanwhile, you feel righteous, even vindicated, because their confusion and pushback look like proof they're hiding something. The way out requires something harder than proving innocence. It requires you to ask what you did that you haven't fully owned yet, and whether the thing you're accusing them of might be something you're actually afraid you are becoming. That question stings, but it's the only path back to solid ground. The convenient reinterpretation. Remember when you said something carelessly to someone and they took it wrong, so you explained what you really meant and somehow they still felt hurt? That gap between what you meant and what landed is where betrayal gets born, because the person on the other end doesn't get to see your intentions. They only see the impact. But there's a crueler version of this, and it happens inside your own head all the time. When you do something that doesn't sit right with you, your mind doesn't panic. It rewrites the story. You snap at your partner and later think, I was just tired. You ignore a friend's text and tell yourself, they probably don't need me anyway. You take credit for someone else's idea in a meeting and frame it as, well, I improved on it. Notice the pattern? You keep the action, but change the meaning. The reinterpretation feels generous to you because it smooths away the shame, the guilt, the hard truth that sometimes you're just not who you want to be in that moment. But here's what the other person is actually watching. They see you do the thing, then they see you act like you didn't, or that it didn't matter, or that it meant something noble. That disconnect, that willingness to be comfortable with your own story while they're left holding the hurt, that's when trust starts to corrode. They're not angry that you made a mistake. They're angry that you made a mistake and then looked them in the eye as if you hadn't. The fix isn't small. It means noticing when your mind reaches for the convenient story and choosing the harder one instead. Loyalty as ownership. You've seen it play out in 1,000 small ways. Someone gives you a favor and suddenly they own a piece of your life. Not in an obvious contract way, but in their mind, a debt appears. And debts have interest. They start to monitor you, not cruelly, maybe not even consciously, but with an edge. They check who else you're spending time with. They bring up what they did for you. They expect your allegiance in ways they never explicitly stated. What felt like generosity had a hidden invoice attached. The real trap is that many people don't separate loyalty from ownership, and they'll defend that conflation with their whole chest. A parent who funded your college becomes confused and furious when you don't live your life according to their vision. A friend who introduced you to your partner somehow believes they have voting rights in your marriage. A boss who believed in you early on watches for any hint that you'd consider another job, as if your ambition is a personal betrayal. They gave you something real, so they expect to collect rent on it forever. The cruel part isn't that they're bad people, it's that they've never questioned whether love and gifts are meant to come with chains. They've watched people operate this way their whole lives, maybe had it done to them, and mistook it for devotion. The moment you recognize this in someone, you can see the architecture of why they'll turn on you. Not because you wronged them, but because you exercised freedom they never granted permission for. The antidote isn't guilt, it's clarity. You can honor what someone gave you without surrendering what you own. The threat of being exposed. Someone knows something about you that you haven't told the people you care about. Maybe it's small, a lie told to avoid looking weak, or maybe it's bigger, the kind of thing that would shift how your partner sees you or rewrite how your friends understand your past. Either way, you feel it like a splinter under your skin, and the closer that person gets to your inner circle, the more you start to hate them without quite knowing why. This is exposure's real mechanic. You don't turn against people because they hurt you, but because they hold a version of the truth that threatens how others see you. The person who knows becomes your enemy, not because of what they did, but because their knowledge is more dangerous than their friendship ever was. Here's where it tightens. Exposure doesn't even need to go public. Just knowing that someone knows, that they could tell, that they hold the power to unmake you, creates a low constant pressure under every interaction. You become hyper-aware of them in crowds. You notice when they're quiet. You read threats into jokes. You track which people they spend time with. Slowly, without deciding to, you distance yourself, control what they see, make them smaller in your life until the threat feels contained. Sometimes people attack the keeper of their secret not because that person betrayed them, but because the secret itself has become unbearable, a weight that only grows heavier the longer someone else carries it. The exposed person becomes the enemy, not out of betrayal, but out of desperation to silence the thing that could undo you. If you're the one holding someone's secret, understand this. They may smile while planning your distance. It's not personal. It's survival. Schadenfreude among friends. Your friend gets passed over for the promotion. For maybe half a second before you catch yourself and feel guilty, there's a tiny lift. Not because you're cruel, but because for one brief moment, the scoreboard tilted and you weren't the one left behind. That flash of relief mixed with pleasure is Schadenfreude, and it lives inside every friendship that also contains a grain of comparison. Here's what makes it so treacherous. It feels like nothing. A microsecond, barely conscious. You might even dress it up as concern while that little spark does its work underneath. The real damage isn't the feeling itself, it's what it whispers next. If their loss makes you feel better, then maybe you needed them to lose. Maybe you've been keeping score all along without knowing it. And once you felt that tiny rush, you start to notice when they stumble, a failed date, a bad haircut, a project that flopped. The Schadenfreude doesn't announce itself as joy in their failure anymore. It hides as relief that you're doing better, as validation that your choices were right, as proof that the gap between you is exactly what you suspected. The trap is that Schadenfreude metastasizes into resentment when the friendship is unequal. When one person has more, does more, reaches further, the smaller person starts unconsciously rooting for the bigger one's failure, not out of hatred, but to rebalance an internal ledger. And the person climbing, they start to feel a strange coldness from those below, and they pull further away, which makes the smaller person feel more justified in their quiet hoping that something cracks. The antidote isn't guilt. It's noticing the comparison before the Schadenfreude takes root. Ask yourself, am I measuring my life against theirs or beside theirs? The abandonment preemption. You pull away first because you are terrified they will leave first. It sounds backwards, like you are manufacturing the exact pain you are trying to avoid. And you are. But the logic underneath is sharper than it looks. If you end it, you get to be the one with agency. You get to tell yourself a story where you chose rather than a story where you were chosen against. Rejection hurts. But rejection you saw coming and acted on feels like power. This shows up everywhere. The friend who goes quiet before the friendship fades, beating you to the exit. The lover who picks a fight 3 months in when things are still good, testing whether you will stay or leave. The person who doesn't reach out because they assume you are tired of them anyway. They are not actually protecting themselves from abandonment. They are protecting themselves from the experience of being abandoned. Two different things entirely. And here is the trap. People read this as coldness. They see someone withdrawing and assume it means the person never cared or wants out or is already done. But often, what they are seeing is fear in motion, someone trying to regain control by staying one step ahead of the axe. The person who walks away first does not always want to walk. They just cannot sit still while waiting for someone else to pull the trigger. If you catch yourself doing this, preempting abandonment by abandoning, the move is not to stay in the moment longer. It is to notice the impulse and ask what you are actually afraid of losing. Sometimes just naming it slows the exit down. Sometimes it stops it entirely. When you're calm and rages them, you're sitting across from someone in full emotional fire, voice rising, face flushed, hands gesturing wildly, and you respond with a quiet, steady tone. You're not trying to be superior. You're just steady, and something in them snaps harder. The rage doesn't cool. It accelerates. You've committed an unforgivable sin. You've remained unshaken while they're breaking apart. In their mind, your calmness is proof you don't care enough to be as upset as they are. It reads as indifference, or worse, as contempt. Your steadiness becomes evidence that you're above them, that their fire doesn't matter, that they're alone in this thing that's tearing them up. Here's what's happening beneath the surface. They're in a state where emotions feel like facts. Their anger isn't just a feeling, it's a diagnosis of how wrong you are, how you failed, how the world isn't safe. When you stay calm, you're implicitly arguing against their entire reality. You're saying without words that this doesn't deserve the alarm they're giving it, that their emotional temperature is calibrated wrong. And that feels like a rejection of them, not just their argument, but their entire nervous system's read on what matters. The deeper trap is that some people interpret your piece as proof that you're the problem. Your composure becomes ammunition. They're not hearing wisdom or restraint. They're hearing abandonment. The trick isn't to match their heat. That just makes both of you burn. It's to stay grounded and genuinely acknowledge what they're feeling without needing them to dial it down first. Show them you see the fire without letting it control whether you stay real with them. That's a different kind of strength than either rage or manufactured indifference, and it's rare enough that when people find it, they stop looking for enemies. The narrative rewrite. You did something you regret. Maybe you snapped at someone. Maybe you made a choice that hurt a relationship, and now your mind is in overdrive, not to apologize or fix it, but to rewrite what actually happened. You weren't rude, they provoked you. You weren't selfish, they didn't understand your position. You weren't careless, the circumstances were impossible. This is narrative rewrite. The brain's genius move at protecting your self-image by quietly editing the facts until the story fits who you need to believe you are. It's not lying exactly. You're not sitting there consciously inventing falsehoods. Instead, your memory softens the edges, highlights the parts that make you look reasonable, and dims the parts that make you look small. A week passes, a month, and the version you tell yourself becomes the version you believe. The person on the receiving end still remembers the original incident, the words you used, the timing, the impact, but you're operating from a different narrative entirely. You can't understand why they're still hurt. To you, it already happened differently. This is why people turn against you slowly and then all at once. It's not that they suddenly decide you're bad. It's that they watch you rewrite the same hurt over and over, refusing to acknowledge what actually happened, and they realize this person will never really see what they did. They will only see the version their mind created. That gap between what you remember and what they lived through becomes the distance that ends the relationship. The move, if you have the spine for it, don't rewrite. Write it down exactly as it happened from their perspective. That pause between impulse and narrative, that's where actual change lives. Group cohesion through a common enemy. Think about your workplace before a big deadline when the leadership sends down a confusing mandate. Suddenly, the hallway conversations shift. People who barely spoke are now bonded over frustration. Engineers, designers, management assistants, all unified in eye-rolling about the higher-ups or the system. The shared frustration becomes almost electric. You feel less alone. Your small team, your department, your whole organization feels like us against them. That sense of belonging is real, and it feels good, and that is exactly the trap. Groups don't stick together as well on shared values alone. Values are abstract and slow, but a common enemy, a rival company, a political opposition, a manager everyone distrusts, that creates immediate, visceral coherence. You stop wondering if your coworker is trustworthy because you both just witnessed injustice. The enemy does the social work for you. This is how movements form, how teams rally, how families stay together through crisis. But watch what happens after the threat passes or the enemy is defeated. The group often fractures immediately because the only real glue was opposition. Without an external target, internal differences resurface and people scatter. Or worse, the group searches for a new enemy to maintain that intoxicating feeling of belonging. You see this in politics, in fandom wars, in office dynamics. Someone gets promoted and suddenly becomes the new internal enemy. A new scandal emerges, and suddenly there is a new villain to unite against. If you notice yourself feeling suddenly bonded to a group because someone else is the problem, pause. Ask whether you actually share values or beliefs, or whether you are just high on the chemistry of opposition. Real cohesion survives when the enemy disappears. The favor never forgiven. You do something big for someone, cancel your plans, lend real money, show up at 3 a.m., sit with them through the wreckage. They cry. They thank you. They tell you it mattered. And then, slowly, without announcement, they start avoiding you. Texts get shorter. Invitations dry up. The person who needed you becomes distant, almost cool. What happened? You helped them. You were supposed to be closer now. Instead, you feel the distance like a knife. When you take someone's help, you owe them something invisible, not money, but a version of yourself that was less capable, less whole, more desperate. Being on the receiving end of a real favor shrinks you. It makes you dependent. It proves you cannot do it alone. And most people hate that feeling more than they hate being alone. The solution becomes almost automatic. Create distance from the person who saw you small. You cannot undo the debt, but you can undo the witness. You can leave the room where you needed them most. It has nothing to do with your kindness and everything to do with their shame. The cruelest part is that people often turn coldest on those who helped them most, because those people hold the proof of their own powerlessness. They knew you when you were desperate. That knowledge is a mirror they cannot live with. The closer you got them to safety, the faster they run from the person who remembers when they needed it. If you have ever felt abandoned by someone you saved, you were not rejected. You were resented for knowing a truth they now want to forget. Sometimes the gift becomes the reason for the goodbye. Status, anxiety, displacement. Your boss barely nods at you in the meeting and your stomach tightens instantly. A small jolt of social demotion, real or imagined. Then something shifts. 5 minutes later, you're furious at your partner for dishes in the sink, at a coworker's tone, at a text that arrived too slowly. None of those things mattered before. What you're watching is your nervous system detecting a threat to your rank, your standing, your invisible place in the hierarchy. Instead of sitting with that raw exposure, it borrows trouble from somewhere safer, somewhere you can actually do something about. Your partner didn't reject you. That coworker didn't demote you, but they're available, and the anxiety needs somewhere to land. Your system knows you can't fight the boss, can't argue your way back to feeling secure, but you can snap at the person who loves you. You can demand better. You can punish someone small for the way someone bigger made you feel. It works too, at least for minutes. You discharge the pressure, feel momentarily in control again, but the person on the receiving end learns something corrosive. That loving you means absorbing your shame, your fear, your status panic. Over time, they stop leaning in. They protect themselves. They step back. And now you've created the exact isolation you terrified of. Actual loss from the people who mattered most. The move here isn't complicated. When you feel that stomach tightness around perception, pause before redirecting the anger. Name it silently. This is about my rank, not about them. That gap between trigger and strike is where you get yourself back. The anxiety won't disappear, but you stop turning it into shrapnel, the false intimacy trap. You tell someone a secret late at night, something real, something that cost you to say, and they listen with soft eyes and nod like they understand you completely. The relief is almost physical. You feel seen. You feel close. Then a few weeks later, they mention it casually to someone else, or they react to a similar problem you have with coldness that surprises you, and suddenly you realize they heard your words, but they weren't actually present. They performed presence. Shared vulnerability doesn't automatically create actual intimacy. It just creates the feeling of it, which is a different animal entirely. What happened is this: you created a brief, intense moment of exposure, and your brain flooded with oxytocin and trust chemicals. Theirs did too, probably. But that chemical state is not the same as actual trust built over time through consistency, seeing each other in boring moments, staying when things are uncomfortable. False intimacy tricks you because it feels real in the body. It smells like connection. You confuse intensity for depth, and because you invested emotion, you assume they invested the same thing, but they may have just been having a moment. They may have been performing empathy because they wanted to seem like a good person, not because they were willing to hold your weight. This is how people turn against you fast. You skipped all the slow trust building and jumped to the vulnerable confession, which made you feel intimate, but made them feel burdened or like you expected more from them than they agreed to. The fix is slower and less glamorous. Build intimacy with people through small, repeated moments of showing up. Save the big reveals for people who've already proven they stick around when you're boring. When you stop being useful, there's a moment in every relationship, professional, romantic, friendship, family, when the calculus shifts beneath you without warning. You're no longer solving a problem. You're the problem. And people will rarely tell you this to your face. They'll just fade. The distance grows quiet. Invitations stop coming. You notice your texts land differently now, like they're being received by a function that's already decided your value. What changed isn't who you are, it's what you offer. Human attachment isn't mystical or romantic the way we pretend. It runs on a simple engine. Does this person add value to my life? Does my time with them multiply my resources, my status, my sense of capability, my emotional safety? When the answer tips toward no, the loyalty evaporates faster than you'd believe. The brutal part is that usefulness isn't fixed. It erodes. Your expertise gets outdated. Your network stops opening doors. Your emotional labor becomes a tax instead of a gift. Someone younger, hungrier, or less complicated can do what you do better. You became the stable one, the reliable one, and they've graduated past you. This isn't cynicism. It's pattern recognition playing out in real time. Watch how people suddenly become too busy once you can't help them get something they want. Notice the friends who call only when they need to vent. The hard move isn't sinking into bitterness. It's building a life where your worth isn't tethered to someone else's benefit calculation. Be useful to yourself first. Make something, know something, do something that keeps you essential to your own story. Learn to recognize the fade before it hardens into absence. Stay sharp, stay growing, stay valuable to the one person who will never leave you, and you might just find that other people start sticking around again. The quiet demotion. You go from being asked for your opinion to being informed of decisions, and the shift happens so gradually you miss it entirely. Meetings occur without your name on the invite. You stop seeing yourself on certain threads. Nobody announces anything. There's no confrontation, no dramatic firing, just a slow slide down a slope you didn't know existed. This is the quiet demotion, and it cuts deeper than the loud kind because it strips your status while giving you nothing concrete to fight. The person orchestrating it never has to justify themselves. They technically did nothing wrong, just adjusted how they include you, and that invisibility becomes the weapon itself. Here's where it gets worse. You start doubting whether you belong there anyway. Was that meeting actually relevant to you? Maybe you weren't as central as you thought. Maybe your ideas weren't that strong. Uncertainty gnaws at you, and you pour energy into second guessing instead of acting, which is precisely what the quiet demotion manufactures. Exhaustion through confusion. It works because we're wired for terror at social exile in ways we rarely admit. For most of human history, being pushed to the edge meant real physical danger, and that ancient panic still lives in your chest when someone treats you as optional, whether they know it or not. They don't need confrontation, just consistency, the small, repeated choice to leave you out. Watch for the moment you start explaining yourself more than before, offering extra context, softening statements you'd have made flat 6 months ago. That's often the signal the demotion has already landed. The move then is to name it clearly and calmly, directly to the person, before the narrative calcifies into fact and becomes the story everyone accepts about who you actually are. Resentment of your freedom. Watch what happens when you tell someone you're leaving early on a Friday, or that you're taking a month off work, or that you don't have to ask permission anymore. There's often a pause, a microsecond where something shifts in their face. Then they ask how you can afford it, or whether that's really responsible, or whether you're being selfish. They're not asking because they care. They're asking because your freedom landed like a stone in their cage. People who feel locked in their own lives develop a specific kind of radar for freedom in others, and that radar converts to resentment the moment it detects it. You see this most acutely in relationships where one person has made different choices. The one who stayed in the marriage, the one who kept the job, the one who never left the hometown. They watch someone else walk away from the same structure and live. That living becomes an indictment of their own stillness. Not because you're saying anything, because your life is saying something. The trap is that these people don't usually attack your freedom directly. They attack the person who has it. They reframe your choices as irresponsible, lucky, selfish, or unstable. They'll find reasons why it won't work out. They'll wait for you to fail because your success would mean admitting that the cage they're in was always optional. This is why some people turn on you most viciously the moment you stop needing them or prove that a different path was possible. You didn't betray them. You showed them a mirror. The cruelty comes not from malice, but from panic. The panic of someone watching the walls they've accepted as permanent dissolve in someone else's hands. The betrayal of raised expectations. Think back to a time when someone you cared about stopped showing up the way they used to, not dramatically, but quietly, almost like a slow deflation. Maybe they used to remember your birthday and suddenly didn't. Maybe they texted constantly and now you're the one always reaching out. The shift itself might be small, but the wound it cuts feels disproportionate, doesn't it? That's because you're not actually grieving the loss of their attention. You're grieving the loss of a version of the relationship you thought was real. Raised expectations are sneaky because they rarely happen all at once. Someone shows up consistently, so your brain learns to expect it. They listen deeply, so you expect them to keep listening. They make a promise and deliver, and now your nervous system has updated the baseline of what normal looks like with them. When they drop back to human-level inconsistency, which is actually normal, It feels like a betrayal because they've trained you to want more than they can sustainably give. Here's the brutal part. They might not have intentionally raised those expectations. Sometimes people are just having a good season and then life tightens. Sometimes they're trying hard and then they burn out. But your brain doesn't care about their reasons. It only knows that the map changed and the person didn't warn you. That warning, that explicit conversation about what's realistic, almost never happens. So instead of resentment landing on, we didn't talk about sustainable patterns, it lands on them as unreliable, as someone who didn't mean what they showed you. The trap is that you start treating the gap between their best and their average as proof they never cared, when really it's just proof they're human. Contempt for the forgiving. Watch what happens the moment you forgive someone before they've actually sat with what they've done. They notice, and you can see it in the shift, that tiny gap where gratitude should land, but something else lands instead. A flicker of contempt, even if they'd never name it that way. Here's what cuts deepest. Forgiveness given too early doesn't feel like grace to them. It feels like proof that what they did wasn't serious enough to break anything real. You're saying their actions don't require transformation, don't demand genuine reckoning, don't carry weight. You're saying they got away with it, and something in human nature recoils from that, not with shame, but with disdain. The stranger alchemy is that you become the one everyone blames. You're soft, you're enabling. You don't respect yourself enough to stay angry. Meanwhile, the person who wronged you feels zero pressure to actually change because your premature forgiveness removed the one thing that might have pushed them toward it. The terrible discomfort of sitting alone with what they broke. No consequence, no real reckoning, just back to normal, and resentment settling into both of you like scar tissue. This is why so many relationships survive the betrayal but die quietly in the forgiveness. Not because forgiveness is poisonous, but because timing is everything. When you forgive before the other person has faced their own wreckage, you're not being generous. You're being transactional, trying to return things to normal so you don't have to feel the pain anymore. They sense that desperation and they lose respect for you. Real forgiveness, the kind that actually transforms something, almost always requires the other person to sit first, alone, and know exactly what they broke. Until then, your forgiveness is just a reset button they'll press again. The insider trading of secrets. There's a moment in every group when someone pulls you aside and says, "I'm telling you this because I trust you." Feel the weight of that. That's not kindness. That's currency exchange. They've just handed you something that holds power over them, and now there's an invisible ledger between you both. You know something about their marriage, their money, their shame. They know you know. And when group dynamics shift, when alliances crack or someone feels threatened, that secret becomes tradable. You see it happen in workplaces constantly. Someone tells their manager a confidence in a moment of vulnerability, and 3 months later, that vulnerability becomes the reason they don't get promoted. It's not betrayal exactly. It's more like that person was holding a poker chip too close to the edge of the table, and when the wind changed, it rolled somewhere else. The real trap is that the more intimate the secret, the higher the stakes feel to keep quiet. So people don't speak up. They let it calcify into resentment because they're terrified of being the one who told. Meanwhile, the person who shared it walks around half paranoid, wondering if it's already made the rounds. This is why trust in groups corrodes so fast. It's not because people are inherently cruel, it's because secrets are leverage, And leverage always gets used eventually, sometimes intentionally, sometimes just because someone felt cornered and needed to balance the scales. The person most likely to trade your secret isn't your enemy. It's someone who feels like they're losing status or backed into a corner. They're not being cruel. They're doing what feels like survival. If you want loyalty to hold, stop handing people ammunition. When empathy is exploited, you meet someone who tells you a story about their suffering, a parent who didn't believe in them, a job that burned them out, a relationship that left them hollow. Your chest tightens. You recognize that feeling. You lean in. You listen deeply. You offer the kind of understanding most people never give. And in that moment, something shifts. They know you see them. They know you care. This person, for the first time, feels truly held. So when they ask you for something weeks later, money, time, cover for a lie, loyalty, even when they're wrong, your empathy becomes the lever they pull. You say yes, not because you genuinely want to, but because saying no would mean becoming the person who abandons them, becoming like everyone else who hurt them. The trap is exquisite because it carries no malice. They may not even be conscious they're doing it, may genuinely believe they are asking a friend for help, but your ability to feel their pain has become a tool for controlling yours. You are no longer choosing generosity. You are avoiding the guilt of being perceived as cruel, avoiding the weight of their disappointment. And here is what makes this insidious. Real empathy requires boundaries. The moment you sacrifice your boundaries to avoid hurting someone, you stop empathizing with them. You start managing them instead. You treat them like a fragile thing that will shatter if you tell the truth, and that is not kindness. That is contempt dressed up as care, a kind of suffocation masquerading as closeness. If someone needs you to abandon yourself to stay close to them, they are not asking for your empathy. They are asking for your disappearance. The loyalty bait and switch. You show up for someone when they're falling apart. Text at midnight, you cancel plans. You listen to the same story 4 times without flinching, and it works. They soften. They start calling you the real one, the person they can count on when everyone else bails. Then the moment comes when you need something, not much, just acknowledgement or reciprocation, or even a simple word back. And suddenly you're met with silence or a defensive wall or a cool explanation about why they can't show up the way you did. The shift is real. What happened is that you were never actually being valued for who you are. You were being valued for what you do. And the moment you stopped performing that role, the moment you became a person with needs instead of a service, you became a threat. Loyalty in that relationship was never mutual. It was a trade that only ran one direction. They loved your function more than your face. This is the bait and switch. People will invite you into their crisis, and in that urgent tenderness, you'll feel chosen, special, like this moment proves the bond is real. But the bond was conditional from the start. It was always, I love that you help me, wearing the costume of I love you. The cruelty isn't in what they do next. It's in the sudden absence of the person you thought you knew. You weren't in their circle, you were in their toolbox. Stay alert for relationships where closeness only flows one way. That's not loyalty. That's a performance that eventually closes, and you'll be left wondering why the person who called you their savior can't return a text when the roles reverse. Punishing the truth teller. A man walks into his office and tells his boss the project will fail. The data is wrong. The timeline is impossible. Everyone on the team knows it. His boss's face hardens. 2 weeks later, he's reassigned. 6 months after that, he's searching for work elsewhere. The part nobody mentions is that he was right. The project collapsed exactly as predicted. but he paid the price for naming it aloud. This is not random cruelty. It runs deeper than that, all the way down to how groups protect themselves. When you speak a truth that contradicts the group's preferred story, you are not just disagreeing with an idea. You are threatening the shared reality that holds everyone together. That reality might be built on denial, self-deception, or convenient blindness, but it is what makes people feel safe and in control. Attack that safety with facts, and the group does not kill the message. It kills the messenger. You see this in families where one sibling names the parents drinking, in teams where someone questions the leader's pet strategy, in friendships where honesty gets read as betrayal. The truth teller becomes the problem, not the situation they named. What makes this brutal is that most people feel no conscious calculation. They feel a hot, righteous anger instead. They feel protective. They feel like the truth teller is the one being unfair, aggressive, divisive. The punishment feels earned. If you find yourself holding a truth nobody wants to hear, know you are not fighting bad logic. You are fighting the human need to belong. Say it if it matters enough, but understand the cost is real, and it has nothing to do with whether you are right. The envy of your peace. You stop checking your phone. You say no to the after-work thing and read instead, and somewhere in that quiet choice, you've committed something in someone else's nervous system. Not a betrayal exactly, but a visible reminder that escape routes exist. People don't resent you for struggle. They understand struggle. They're drowning in it. But they absolutely resent you for having found a way out of theirs. Your peace becomes a mirror they didn't ask to hold up to themselves, and mirrors trigger something primal. When you're calm and someone around you is still cycling through the old anxieties, that gap creates gravitational pull. They'll find reasons to drag you back down. Maybe they'll say you're selfish now, boring, that you think you're better. Maybe they'll invent a crisis or test your availability or remind you how much is falling apart. What they're really saying underneath is, it's unfair that you rest while I'm still here. Envy of peace works differently than envy of money or status because those are abstractions you can dismiss. Peace is lived. It's your voice calm on the phone, something they can't fake. It's the absence of their 2 a.m. spiral partner. It's you choosing yourself and it actually working, which makes them feel stupid for staying stuck. The treacherous part is that their anger often feels justified, like you've abandoned them by getting better, and they'll be convincing about it. But here's what matters. Their envy is not your responsibility to solve, and your peace is not selfish. You need to spot it early, though. When people subtly undermine your quieter choices, when they pull hardest the moment you settle most deeply, they're not angry at you. They're furious with themselves. Your job is to keep your borders steady and let them find their own way back to solid ground. When trust becomes leverage, think back to someone who asked you for something vulnerable, maybe a secret, a fear, an admission you'd never made to anyone else. You told them because the moment felt safe, because their eyes were kind, because they promised it would stay between you two. And then one day, months or years later, when you disagreed or when they felt wounded, that confession appeared. Not as a secret anymore, as ammunition. The shift happens quietly, almost imperceptibly. Trust itself becomes the weapon. What made you feel safe is now the very thing that leaves you exposed. And the worst part is the bewilderment. They act like you should have known better, like sharing with them was your mistake, not their betrayal. This is how intimate relationships curdle. A parent who throws your teenage diary in your face during a fight, a partner who weaponizes your insecurity about your body, a friend who tells everyone the thing you admitted in confidence and frames it as concern. They don't do it once and apologize. They do it, and when you react, they flip it. You're too sensitive. You're ungrateful. You shouldn't have told them if you didn't want it used. The cruelty isn't just the betrayal, it's the gaslighting after, the rewriting of intimacy itself as your fault. The deepest damage lives in the knowing that the person closest to you proved they will weaponize your vulnerability when it serves them. That knowledge doesn't just damage the relationship, it damages your ability to trust anyone, rewires how you show up in every conversation after. When someone shows you they will use your honesty as leverage, that's not a small mistake. That's a choice, a habit, a pattern unfolding. Pay close attention to it. Not everyone who listens deserves to know you. The slow poisoning of reputation. You've probably noticed that someone's reputation doesn't crater overnight. It dissolves like a watercolor left in the rain, one small incident bleeding into the next, each one barely memorable alone. A colleague forgets to credit you in a meeting. A friend cancels twice without rescheduling. You snap at someone over something small and let the sourness hang in the air. None of these moments feels catastrophic in real time, but watch what happens when they stack. People begin to construct a pattern, a shape, a story about who you are. And that story travels faster than any apology ever could. The cruelest mechanism is that reputation poisoning works through absence as much as action. It's not just what you do wrong, it's that you don't show up, don't follow through, don't call back, don't repair. Someone starts telling themselves you're unreliable or unkind or selfish, and the human brain does what it does best. It hunts for evidence to confirm that suspicion. That small time you were late suddenly proves you're inconsiderate. That joke that landed flat becomes proof you're actually mean. Each new moment gets filtered through the lens of the story already forming, twisted to fit the narrative. The person with the damaged reputation usually doesn't see it happening until the damage is structural, until they're trying to rebuild something that's already been rewired in 100 conversations they weren't part of. The antidote isn't one grand gesture of redemption. It's the unglamorous work of consistency, of showing up the same way repeatedly, of making the small repairs before they calcify into character. Reputation is built in the margins, one quiet moment at a time, and it dies there too. The alliance of convenience. You and someone else have nothing in common except that right now you both want the same thing. Maybe a shared enemy at work, maybe a mutual goal like money or status or a problem solved. The friendship feels real because the heat is real. You talk more than usual, laugh together, move like you're on the same team. Then the threat passes or the goal gets reached and the texts slow down. The calls stop. The person you thought was your ally suddenly feels like a stranger. What happened is you mistook proximity for permanence. An alliance of convenience is not a friendship. It's a temporary border where two people's interests overlap. The trap is that your brain does not distinguish well between the two. Shared purpose releases oxytocin. Cooperation feels like belonging. So when the alliance dissolves, it registers not as the deal is done, but as I've been betrayed. People have turned vicious over this confusion, mistaking utility for loyalty. The quieter trap is that you can weaponize it too. Build allies by framing a shared enemy or a shared win, and people feel bonded to you without actually knowing you. Once the mutual need evaporates, so does the bond. They were never yours. You were just convenient. The chemistry you felt was not connection. It was alignment, and alignment lives only as long as the circumstance does. Before you trust someone, ask what happens to that relationship the moment you no longer need anything from each other, the moment the enemy dissolves or the goal gets crossed. That question alone will tell you whether you have something real. When success feels like accusation, you close a deal at work, you get the promotion, you land the client everyone wanted, and somewhere in the room you feel the temperature shift, not obvious, just a small frost creeping in. A text goes unanswered longer than usual. Someone who always laughed at your jokes suddenly doesn't. You find yourself replaying your own success like you've done something wrong, searching backward through the whole thing for the moment you crossed a line you didn't even know existed. The cruelest part, your win didn't hurt anyone. It just revealed who was counting on you to stay small. This is one of the quietest ways people turn against you because it doesn't announce itself as resentment. It wears the mask of concern instead. A friend who says, "That's great, but don't let it change you," really means, "Don't outgrow me." A family member who pivots to, "You must be so stressed now," is code for you've broken the agreement to keep us equal. You achieved something real, something that took work and risk and vulnerability, and somehow that became your crime. The trap is that you'll start apologizing for it without even meaning to. You'll keep your wins smaller. You'll talk less about what's going right. You'll hedge and deflect and diminish until you're barely visible again. And the people who resented your rise will feel safe once more. And they'll despise you anyway, because now you're acting like the thing they were jealous of was shameful all along. The move isn't to shrink back down. It's to notice the accusation hiding inside the congratulations. Accept that some relationships can't survive your expansion and stop treating your own growth like a betrayal of the people who wish you hadn't moved forward at all. The double bind of honesty. You tell someone the truth and watch their face harden. They asked for it, begged you to be real with them, but the moment you land the honest thing, you become the villain in their story. They wanted transparency, but they wanted the kind that doesn't sting. They wanted honesty that reassures, not honesty that bruises. Welcome to the double bind. And it's where most of your relationships go quietly sideways. The trap is this: people say they value truth, but what they actually value is comfort dressed up as truth. If you soften it, you're lying. If you deliver it straight, you're cruel. There is no third door. You've seen it happen. A friend asks if their new relationship is healthy, and when you say what you actually see, red flags, patterns, the whole thing, suddenly you're jealous, judgmental, or just not supportive. They didn't want your honest read, they wanted your blessing. Or a partner pushes you to share what you're really feeling, and when you do, they spiral, cry, say you're making them feel bad, and now you're responsible for managing their reaction to your own truth. The double bind is the reason people stop being honest with anyone at all. It's exhausting to be punished for doing what was asked of you, so they go quiet, they smile, they become the version of themselves that doesn't make anyone uncomfortable, and then people wonder why nobody really knows them. The escape is smaller than you'd think. Stop assuming that honesty is always a gift. Sometimes it's a choice to take the hit yourself rather than hand someone the pain of seeing themselves clearly. You can be honest and kind, but not always. Pick who deserves both. Resentment of being needed. You answer the call at midnight, show up again, solve the problem that somehow keeps recurring, and somewhere beneath the surface goodness, a tiny voice begins to whisper that you are trapped. Not by love, but by obligation, by the weight of their dependency on you. The resentment doesn't arrive like anger. It arrives like exhaustion wearing a mask of duty, and it grows quietest right before it explodes. What makes this so corrosive is the silence around it. You cannot say, "I resent being needed," without sounding cruel, so you swallow the feeling and answer again. But swallowing it doesn't dissolve it. It pools. It ferments. After enough repetitions, something shifts in how you see them. Their vulnerability, which once moved you, now feels like a weight. Their trust feels like a trap you set for yourself. You start to notice their failures more sharply, to judge their choices, to mentally keep score of all the times you came through while they did not. The person on the other end rarely sees this happening. They see you still showing up, don't feel the temperature drop in your words, and so they keep asking, keep needing, keep believing the old story about who you are to them right up until you disappear or explode. The turn against you often happens not because you failed them, but because you succeeded too well at proving how much they needed you, and that success became its own kind of resentment. The bond begins to curdle into something neither of you recognizes anymore, and here is the trap within the trap. If you ever try to name what happened, they will point to all the times you showed up and ask why those suddenly mean nothing. They were real, but so was the cost. Both truths live in the same moment, and that contradiction is exactly why the resentment metastasizes into something darker than anger. It becomes contempt disguised as care. The withdrawal you never noticed. Someone stops texting you back as fast. A friend sits a little quieter in the group. A partner moves from the couch to the kitchen during movie night. Small, nearly invisible shifts that your brain registers but your mouth doesn't name. And then one day you realize the relationship has already ended. You were just the last to know. This is withdrawal, and it's almost always the person's first choice before the breakup speech ever comes. When people decide to leave romantically, platonically, or professionally, they don't usually announce it. They pull back first. It's a test run, a slow fade that tells them what losing you will feel like. Your job is to notice when the texture changes. Not paranoia, but pattern. Are they still asking about your day or just answering? Do they still initiate or just respond? Is the laughter real or performed? Here's what makes this brutal. Withdrawal is often quiet because the person hasn't fully decided yet. They're gathering evidence. They're seeing if you'll notice and fight for them, or if you'll accept the distance as normal. Some use it to punish. Others use it as a signal they hope you'll finally hear. By the time you feel the withdrawal, they may already be halfway gone. That gap between your "I didn't see it coming" and their "I was gone for months" is the real heartbreak. The cruel part, nobody names. Withdrawal tests you before they leave you. It's their way of asking a question without words. So the next time someone goes slightly quiet, don't dismiss it as a passing mood or a bad week. Ask directly, gently, with no accusation in your voice, because withdrawal is often the last language before silence becomes permanent, and the difference between catching it and missing it can be everything. When forgiveness is punished, you let someone back in after they hurt you. Maybe you didn't even want to, something just cracked open and you offered a second chance. What happens next is the part nobody warns you about. The person who was forgiven doesn't always feel grateful. Sometimes they feel exposed. They know what they did. They know you have that knowledge stored somewhere, and it terrifies them. So they punish you for seeing them that clearly. They'll distance themselves, pick small fights, remind you of the power imbalance they created. Or worse, They'll turn it around, making your forgiveness into proof that you're soft, gullible, weak. They'll test the boundary repeatedly, almost as if they need to confirm you're still the person who let them off the hook. This is not mercy being rejected. This is fear showing its teeth. When someone knows you've forgiven them, you've essentially witnessed their worst self and chosen to stay anyway. That's intimacy, and intimacy terrifies people who aren't sure they're worth it. They can't live comfortably with your grace because grace demands they believe in their own capacity to change, and many people don't. So they create distance by making you regret the gift. They turn you into the bad guy for having extended it in the first place. The quiet horror is this: forgiveness often doesn't heal the relationship. Sometimes it just shifts who holds the power, and wounded people with power almost always use it to hurt. If someone punishes you for forgiveness, you're not dealing with someone too broken to change. You're dealing with someone not yet ready to believe they deserve to. That's a different problem entirely, and it's theirs to solve, not yours to carry. The coalition against the strong. There's a moment in every workplace, every friend group, every community where someone gets too visible. They're performing well, getting noticed, making moves, and then something shifts, not in what they did, but in how the air feels around them. Suddenly, people who barely knew each other are finding common ground. The mid-tier performer and the struggling one. The jealous peer and the cautious observer. They're not planning it explicitly, but they're noticing flaws they overlooked before, sharing stories, forming a coalition. This isn't conspiracy, it's evolution. Humans have always sensed when one member threatens the group's equilibrium. When someone rises too fast, they become a lightning rod for redistribution of status, and the group's unconscious logic kicks in. If we let this climb unchecked, the hierarchy tilts and our relative position shrinks. So we balance it. A raised eyebrow here, a withdrawn invitation there, a story about their weakness told just quietly enough. The remarkable part is how universal this is, and how invisible. The person being circled rarely sees it as coordinated effort. They see bad luck or people turning mean, but the coalition members don't feel coordinated either. They each feel like they're simply noticing something true, and that's precisely how it works. The group doesn't need a leader or a meeting. It just needs gravity pulling everyone toward the same quiet conclusion. This person has risen far enough. What makes it most effective is the scatter. No single person carries the weight of the attack. The burden breaks across a dozen small moments, a dozen small voices, until the target feels siege from all sides, yet can't point to any one aggressor. Next time you see someone ascend, watch how quickly the perimeter tightens. Watch how the air changes without anyone saying a word. The betrayal you invited. You hold something back, financial trouble, a private shame, something unkind you said about them behind their back, not malice, just easier that way. For weeks or months, the secret sits quiet while you move through normal conversations, normal mornings, normal silences together. Then one day they find out, and suddenly you're the betrayer. But here's what really cuts. You already knew they'd feel betrayed by that secret long before they discovered it. You made the choice to keep selling them the lie anyway, one quiet day at a time. The betrayal wasn't the fact itself. It was the decision to withhold something you knew mattered to them. This is different from a mistake or bad timing. This is you making a small, repeatable choice while fully aware of what it would cost them, while you're justifying the silence with, "It wasn't worth hurting them," or "They don't need to know." you're actually building the exact conditions for a deeper wound. Because when they find out, they don't just learn the secret, they learn that you decided consciously to treat them as someone who wasn't allowed the truth. They learn you thought you knew better than them what they could handle. That's not betrayal of fact. That's betrayal of respect. The people who turn against you hardest often aren't reacting to what you did. They're reacting to who you showed yourself to be in every moment before they found out. Each time you chose normal conversation while holding back the thing you knew would matter, you were teaching them something about yourself, that you decide their reality for them. The invitation wasn't the secret itself. It was every quiet moment you chose silence over honesty, knowing exactly what it would feel like to be on the other side of that knife. When silence reads as guilt, you ask your partner what's wrong, they say nothing. You ask again, still nothing. And in that second silence, your brain does what brains do. It fills the void. They're mad. They're hiding something. They don't trust you. You spiral. By the time they finally speak 3 minutes later, you've already written an entire story where you're the villain, and now you're defensive before they've said a word. This is the machinery of silence misread, and it runs on one simple rule. Absence of information is not neutral. Your mind abhors a vacuum and will stuff it full of threat. Here's what actually happened in that pause. Maybe they were thinking, maybe they didn't know how to start, maybe they were sad in a way that had nothing to do with you, but silence is transparent to the person who's speaking it and opaque to the person listening. You can't see their internal state, so you project yours onto theirs. If you feel guilty, silence feels like accusation. If you feel defensive, silence feels like judgment. The listener becomes the judge in their own anxiety trial. The trap deepens because silence is also how we signal disapproval. It's how we withdraw. So silence carries a loaded history before anyone even opens their mouth. You learned young that being ignored meant you'd done something wrong, and that lesson never fully leaves. Now every quiet moment lands like a small verdict. The next time you feel that spiral starting, try naming it out loud instead of pantomiming it. I'm getting nervous in this quiet. That one sentence often turns silence from accusation into conversation. Sometimes just saying it stops you from becoming the villain in your own story. The moral high ground grab. You make a mistake, someone notices, and instead of admitting you were wrong, you pivot. Suddenly, the conversation becomes about how they're being judgmental or unkind or not understanding where you're coming from. The ground shifts beneath their feet, and now they're defending themselves while you're still standing on the original mistake. That pivot is the moral high ground grab, and it works because it feels invisible to the person doing it. Your brain genuinely believes you're the one being wronged. Neurotically framing yourself as the victim of their scrutiny doesn't feel like a dodge. It feels like truth. This works especially well when you've built a reputation for being sensitive or struggling. People get tired of being cast as the villain in your story, so they back off, apologize for how they said it rather than what you did. And the original thing gets buried under layers of meta-conflict. The trapped part is that once you've grabbed the high ground, staying there requires constant vigilance. You have to keep proving you're the hurt one, the misunderstood one, the one with the damaged past. Every genuine mistake becomes evidence of how hard you're trying despite your struggles. And people who love you will eventually notice the pattern. They'll see the grab happen, recognize it, and start pulling away, not because you failed, but because you refuse to simply say you're sorry. The antidote isn't performing repentance. It's noticing the moment your brain offers you that escape route and choosing the harder move instead. Staying in the discomfort, naming what you did without footnotes or context, and letting someone be disappointed in you without rushing to recast yourself as wounded. That's the only ground that actually holds. The friend who keeps you small. You mention a promotion at work and they go quiet, not angry quiet, just a slight pause, then something like, "Oh, that's nice," followed immediately by a story about their cousin who got a title bump but still hated the job. You feel the momentum drop. The win doesn't land the way it should. This happens again when you announce the relationship, the fitness goal, the creative project. Each time their response carries a small weight that pulls the oxygen from the room. And here's the trap most people miss. They're not deliberately sabotaging you. They're probably not even conscious of it. But somewhere deep, your growth unsettles them. Maybe it triggers what they haven't achieved. Maybe they're afraid you'll need them less or leave them behind. So they reach for the subtle kill, a comment that reframes your win as smaller, a story that shifts the spotlight back to them, a silence that makes you second guess whether this matters. You start to notice the pattern without quite naming it. A promotion comes through and you hesitate before telling them. A success lands and you find yourself downplaying it before they can. Over time, you shrink yourself to keep the peace with them and they get exactly what they needed. A friend who stays small enough to pose no threat. The friendship feels safe, but you feel less alive in it. What changes things is noticing this dynamic without trying to fix them or yourself, just recognizing the price you're paying. You don't need to burn the relationship or make them wrong. You need to stop believing their version of your wins. Find the people who amplify you instead. They exist. They're looking for the full-sized you, not the edited version you've learned to perform. When boundaries end the friendship, there's a moment, usually quiet, never theatrical, when a friendship fractures because one person said no. You set a limit. You stopped being available at 3 a.m. You didn't lend money. You asked them to respect something that mattered to you. And suddenly, the warmth drained out, replaced by texts that came slower, invitations that dried up, a coldness that felt like punishment. The friendship didn't just cool, it felt like a betrayal reversed on you, as if by protecting yourself, you'd hurt them first. Here's what most people don't see. A friendship built on no boundaries isn't a friendship. It's a transaction dressed up like one. One person was getting needs met, emotional labor, money, accessibility, unconditional accommodation, and they mistook that for closeness. When you say yes to everything, people don't think you're generous. Their brain rewires to see your availability as the price of admission. It becomes normal. It becomes owed. The moment you establish an actual limit, you've introduced a truth the dynamic couldn't handle. You're signaling that you have a self, that your time and energy belong to you, not them. For people used to unlimited access, that feels like betrayal. Some will rage, some will withdraw and gaslight you into thinking you're selfish. Some will simply leave, seeking someone more pliable. But here's the hard mercy. If someone abandons you the moment you set a boundary, they were never your friend. They were a parasite with good timing. A real friendship survives, sometimes even deepens, when one person says, "This is what I can give." The ones that dissolve under that pressure, let them go. You didn't lose a friend. You exposed a mistake wearing friendship's clothes. The gratitude asymmetry, you do something hard for someone, you show up, you fix the thing, you listen for hours, and after a week, they don't text, They don't mention it. It feels like it never happened. Meanwhile, if they did that exact thing for you, you'd probably still be thinking about it, still grateful, still aware of the debt. The math should balance, right? But it doesn't. And the reason has nothing to do with how selfish they are or aren't. Psychologically, here's what's happening. When you help someone, it's an action you remember performing. You can see the effort, the cost, the thing you sacrificed, or the time you gave. You're the hero of that story. But when someone helps you, your brain has a different job. It's already moved on to the benefit, to what you have now because of them. The gift fades into the background. The effort they paid becomes invisible to you because you live in the world it created. This is brutal when you're the helper. You're tracking your own sacrifice while they're living in the relief it bought them. And so you start keeping score without telling them, and the resentment builds quietly until one day you snap at them for something small and they have no idea why you are actually angry. They're not ungrateful people. Their brain is just wired to remember what they have, not how it got there. The gap that kills relationships isn't malice. It's the fact that gifts always look bigger from the hand that gave them than from the one that received them. The move, if you want to stop this from poisoning things, is to tell them, not bitterly, just the truth. I need you to know this mattered to me. Punishing perceived superiority. You say something smart in a meeting. You didn't mean to show off. You just had a thought. But someone's jaw tightens. Later, that person finds a flaw in your work, brings it up publicly, or quietly turns others against you. They didn't object to what you said. They objected to the version of you they built in that moment. Someone who thinks they're better, and now they're collecting evidence to prove you're not. This is the tax on visibility. The moment you seem like you're winning, whether through competence, luck, or just being heard, some part of the group shifts into correction mode. It's not envy exactly, though that's in the mix. It's something sharper. The need to restore balance, to prove that nobody gets to sit higher than the rest. If you're smart, you'd better also be humble. If you're successful, you'd better be sorry about it. If you're right, you'd better apologize for making others feel wrong. The unspoken rule is brutal. Visibility paired with confidence reads as a threat. So the punishment comes wrapped in righteousness. What makes it stick is that the person genuinely believes they're punishing arrogance, not punishing you. Your confidence reads as a threat to the social order, so they're not being cruel, they're being protective. The group needs you to remember your place. That certainty is what gives the punishment teeth. The real trap, shrinking, doesn't actually earn safety. It just teaches people that taking you down works. It becomes a reflex. Notice when you're reaching to diminish yourself, not because it's honest, but because you learned early that being right costs more than it's worth. That's when the punishment has done its job, whether anyone ever threw a stone or not. The convenient forgetting of debts. You lend your friend $200 when they're broke and they say thank you with real feeling. 3 months later, they're posting Instagram photos of a weekend trip while you're still eating ramen. When you mention the money casually, they get defensive. I know, I'll get it to you. And then they never bring it up again, and neither do you, because pointing it out a second time feels like you're the bad guy. So the debt floats there, unresolved, poisoning something you can't quite name. What you're watching isn't forgetfulness. It's a psychological disappearing act that humans execute with precision. When we owe someone, we experience a quiet discomfort that the brain treats like a threat. We have to hold two things at once. I'm a good person and I'm not keeping my promise. That tension hurts, so the mind finds an elegant escape. it rewrites the loan. The debt becomes a gift in memory, the amount shrinks. The original circumstance gets fuzzy. Maybe they were richer than we thought. Maybe it was never a real loan at all. And now the person we owe transforms into the villain. We become the victim who got cornered. Here's where it twists. The person who owes you often ends up resenting you more than you resent them. You become a walking reminder of their failure. Around you, they feel judged, even if you've said nothing, so they avoid you, or worse, they start to dislike you because your existence requires them to hold that discomfort. The debt itself matters less than the person holding it against them. If you've noticed this pattern working against you, the only move is clarity. Never let the debt float. Say it out loud. Name the amount, the timeline, the terms. Make it explicit enough that it can't be rewritten into a gift later. The moment you codify it, the rewriting stops. When kindness feels like control, your friend drops everything to help you move. They show up with coffee, lift the heavy boxes, text you later to check if you're sore. And somewhere in the middle of that kindness, you feel a small tightness in your chest. Not gratitude, but something closer to debt that never quite gets paid. That feeling is real, and it's not ingratitude. It's the weight of invisible obligation settling into your bones. Real kindness is free. It costs the giver, sure, but it shouldn't cost the receiver anything after it's done. Yet, some people give in ways that leave you smaller, not bigger. They help you, and then somehow you're the one responsible for their feelings about helping. They rescue you, and now they own a piece of your story. You owe them the narrative that they were the good one. This is kindness as control, and it lives in that gap between what they did and what they expect you to become because of it. The giver isn't always conscious they're doing it. They might genuinely believe they're being selfless while running an invisible accounting system in their head. Every act becomes a deposit in a relationship bank, and someday they'll need a withdrawal. Sometimes it's explicit, after all I've done for you, and sometimes it's just the weight of their sad face when you set a boundary, the silent message that you've broken something sacred. Genuine generosity feels light on both sides. It doesn't linger like a shadow or come with strings that tighten the moment you stop performing gratitude. If you find yourself smaller after someone's kindness, if you're tiptoeing around their fragility instead of tending to yours, that's your signal. Kindness that demands your indebtedness isn't kindness at all. It's a transaction wearing a very convincing disguise. The rival disguised as mentor. Someone walks into your life right when you're most hungry, yearning to level up, searching for direction, feeling the gap between where you are and where you want to be. They seem to see something in you. They hand you compliments that feel tailored, show you what looks like a shortcut, promise introductions to people who matter. For weeks or months, you think you've finally found the thing you've been missing. Then something small happens. They mention your mistake to someone before you get the chance to own it, or an introduction they promised gets delayed just long enough, or an idea you shared in front of them somehow reappears under their name in a quieter corner. The poison moves slowly. A real rival comes at you straight. This person stays dressed in mentorship while competing with you for oxygen in the same rooms, for the same attention, the same win. What cuts deepest is that you showed them your bones. You admitted what you didn't know. You trusted them to want your rise as much as their own. Your vulnerability becomes their leverage, not with a knife, but with patience and timing. They'll applaud you where others listen while making sure credit routes toward them when it matters. They'll push you toward bigger bets while quietly securing their own ground. The disorientation almost hurts more than clean betrayal because you can't quite name what shifted. It looked like mentorship. It felt genuine, but underneath was always this: they needed you smaller, or at least not bigger than them. Notice who only celebrates your growth when theirs accelerates, or who stops sharing the moment you start asking harder questions. Real teachers want you to eclipse them. The pretenders just want you on your knees. The public loyalty performance. You've seen it 1,000 times. Someone posts a photo with their partner, hashtags it with hearts, and 6 months later they're telling you in private that they checked out years ago. The post wasn't a lie, exactly. It was a performance. And the thing about performance is that the audience doesn't get to see what happens off stage. When you perform loyalty publicly, whether it's tagging someone in a couple's photo, defending them online, making a big show of your commitment, or posting tributes on their birthday, you're not necessarily signaling the truth of the relationship. You're signaling that you want to be seen as loyal. There's a gap between the two, and people live in that gap constantly. The darker part is that public loyalty performance actually weakens real loyalty over time. When you've already performed the role in front of witnesses, your brain gets a hit of satisfaction. The relationship feels secure in your mind because the world has seen you stake your flag in it. But private connection, actual presence, real trust, those don't get the same neurological reward. So you coast. You show up less. You defend less when it matters. You skip the boring Tuesday conversations because there's no audience there to appreciate your commitment. Then one day, someone else notices that gap too, and they perform their loyalty louder, and suddenly the person you performatively loved is turning toward them instead. The trap is thinking loyalty lives in the broadcast. It doesn't. Loyalty lives in what you do when nobody's watching, in the small choices, in the showing up when it's boring, and there's no audience and nothing gets liked. Notice where you perform versus where you actually invest. The people who see the difference will remember it. When your absence rewrites you. You leave a group chat for 2 weeks, and when you return, the conversation has moved on without you. A new inside joke, a crisis resolved, a person's whole emotional arc completed. You read backward through the messages and realize nobody was asking where you went. This is the knife. You were replaced so quickly that your absence became invisible. But here's what happens in that silence. The group didn't just move on, they rewrote who you are in that space. You became the person who ghosted, the one who wasn't there when it mattered. Now, when you show up again, you're stepping into a version of yourself you didn't choose. This happens everywhere. Leave a job for a month, and your replacement becomes the one who actually follows up. Skip your kid's soccer season, and you become the parent who wasn't there. Don't text back for 3 days, and you become the friend who doesn't value us. The people around you don't stay neutral when you disappear. They fill the void with a story, assigning you a role in your own absence, usually the abandoning one, the unreliable one. When you return, they treat you like that rewritten version, and you will fight to correct it. But the image has set like concrete. The only move is noticing earlier, before the gap grows too wide, before the story hardens into identity. Show up in small, consistent ways that are harder to erase, not dramatic returns or grand gestures, just presence, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. Because absence doesn't teach people to wait, it teaches them you were temporary, the betrayal of shared history. You've built something with someone over years, real things, the inside jokes that nobody else gets. the vacation where you laughed so hard you couldn't breathe, the 3 a.m. phone call when they showed up without being asked, the way they know exactly what you need before you say it. This is the soft architecture of closeness, the only real estate that matters to the human heart. Then one day, something breaks, a betrayal, a lie, a choice that feels like a sideways knife. And here's what kills you the most. They don't just lose your trust in that moment. They rewrite everything that came before it. The inside jokes feel like mockery now. That vacation feels like performance, like you were being managed instead of loved. The 3 a.m. moment feels like manipulation, a calculated move to cement their position in your life. Your brain does a frantic audit of the entire relationship, searching backward for the lie, the angle, the moment they stopped being real and started being a character. Nothing survives intact. The betrayal doesn't just poison the present, it contaminates the past with a retroactive stain you can't wash out no matter how hard you try. This is why people who betray you often say, "I was never the person you thought I was." Sometimes that's true, and you were fooled by your own longing. But sometimes they were genuinely real with you, and then they weren't, and the betrayal forces a brutal choice. Grieve the loss of who they were, or pretend the good parts never happened. Most people choose rage instead because grief about someone still standing in front of you is almost unbearable. They made it impossible to love the history you shared, to trust even the moments that felt untouched. Not the lie itself, but the way it reaches backward and erases the person you thought you knew. That's the real wound, the threat of your independence. You make a small decision without asking permission first. Maybe you choose a new job, move cities, or decide to spend time alone instead of always being available when called. And then something shifts in the people around you. They don't celebrate it. They become quieter, more cutting, or they suddenly remember all your past failures with brutal clarity. Maybe they ghost you entirely. What actually happened in that moment? You threatened something they didn't know they needed from you. Your dependence on their approval, your hunger to be validated by them, your need for them to feel necessary and indispensable. Independence isn't just about freedom for you. It's also about losing a particular kind of power over you that felt like oxygen to them. People who have grown comfortable with your uncertainty, your constant seeking, your perpetual hunger to be told who you are and whether you're okay, don't just let that go quietly. When you stop needing them to tell you who you are or to confirm your worth, they lose leverage. They lose the daily proof that they matter, that they're needed, that you depend on their judgment. So the pressure gets wrapped in concern. I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. You're changing. But what's really being defended is their place in your orbit and the power they wielded there. The people who can sit with your independence without flinching, without pulling you back down with guilt or manufactured drama, are rare and worth keeping close. That tightness in your chest when you make a move toward yourself and feel the emotional temperature drop around you. That's you sensing the real cost of freedom. The quiet retaliation isn't random cruelty. It's almost always a response to someone who finally stopped asking for permission to exist.